Welcome back, Legends. This is HP Fiction. Here we explore powerful Harry Potter what-if stories. What if Harry Potter was the reincarnation of Rimuru Tempest and entered Hogwarts as a demon lord? If you enjoy epic magical videos, subscribe to HP Fiction. Now, let the story begin. Chapter 1, The Reborn Demon Lord. The cupboard under the stairs was dark. Not the kind of dark that pressed against your eyelids when you closed them, or the kind that settled into the corners of a room at midnight. This was a living darkness, thick and patient, filled with the musty scent of old dust and the faint, sour tang of years of neglect. It was the kind of darkness that knew you better than you knew yourself. Harry Potter lay on the thin mattress, his small body curled into a tight ball beneath a blanket so threadbare it might as well have been a spider's web. His glasses sat folded on the floor beside him, their lenses cracked from the last time Dudley had used them for target practice. His ribs ached where his uncle's fist had connected earlier that evening, a dull, persistent throb that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. He was 6 years old. Or rather, the body he inhabited was 6 years old. The soul within that body was something else entirely, something ancient and vast and terrible, though it didn't know it yet. The boy had dreams sometimes, strange dreams filled with slime and stars and a voice that called him by a name that wasn't his. He would wake gasping, clutching his chest as if something had been torn from him, the echo of that name still ringing in his ears. Rimuru. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't know why it made his heart ache with a grief so profound it felt like drowning. All he knew was that the Dursleys hated him, that the world outside the cupboard was sharp and cruel, and that there was something wrong with him. Something that made spiders freeze in their tracks when he looked at them and made the glass of water on his bedside table tremble when he grew too angry. The boy didn't understand that the trembling glass was magic. He didn't understand that the spider's frozen terror was the instinctive response of lesser creatures to a predator beyond their comprehension. He didn't understand that the grief in his dreams was the echo of a world he'd left behind, a world of monsters and miracles, of power beyond mortal imagining, of a love so vast it had spanned dimensions. He understood nothing. But that was about to change. The night was cold, colder than it had any right to be for early July. The wind howled through the cracks in the cupboard door, carrying with it the distant sound of Aunt Petunia snoring from upstairs. Harry lay awake, as he often did, staring at the darkness above him and counting the seconds until dawn. 1, 2, 3. It was a game he'd invented to keep himself sane. Count the seconds, count the breaths, count the heartbeats. Focus on the numbers and not on the hollow ache in his chest that had been there for as long as he could remember. 47, 48, 49. The darkness shifted. Harry froze, his counting forgotten. The air in the cupboard had changed. It was warmer now, heavier, charged with something that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He could feel it pressing against his skin, a pressure that was almost physical, like being wrapped in a blanket made of lightning. And then the voice came. It wasn't a sound, exactly. It was more like a thought that wasn't his own, a presence that bloomed in his mind like a flower opening to the sun. It was gentle and vast and impossibly old, and it spoke his name, both of his names, in a language that had no words. Harry. Rimuru, it is time. The boy sat up so fast his head spun. His glasses were on his face before he realized he'd reached for them, the cracked lenses somehow clear now, as if the darkness itself had repaired them. The cupboard door was open, though he hadn't touched it. Beyond it, the hallway stretched into shadow, and at the end of that hallway stood a figure. He couldn't make out details, just a silhouette, tall and slender, wrapped in something that shimmered like moonlight on water. The figure raised a hand, and the shadows around it seemed to bow, curling inward as if in reverence. Who are you? Harry's voice came out as a whisper, thin and trembling. He was terrified, he should have been terrified, but beneath the fear was something else. Something that felt like recognition. The figure stepped closer, and the shadows fell away to reveal a face that was both beautiful and terrible. High cheekbones, skin pale as alabaster, eyes that burned with the light of distant stars. The being smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Harry's heart clench with a grief he couldn't explain. Child, the being said, and its voice was like wine through autumn leaves, I am what you will become. I am what you once were. I am the echo of a power that transcends this world, and I have come to wake you from your slumber. Harry's mouth went dry. I don't understand. No, the being agreed, its star-bright eyes softening with something that might have been compassion. You do not. But you will. It reached out, and Harry flinched, but the being's fingers only brushed against his forehead, touching the lightning bolt scar that had been there as long as he could remember. The touch was cold and hot at the same time, and Harry gasped as something inside him shifted. The world went white. He was falling. No, he was flying. Or perhaps he was both at once, tumbling through a void that had no up or down, no left or right, no beginning or end. Colors swirled around him, greens and blues and golds that pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Voices whispered in the darkness, thousands of them, millions, speaking in languages he'd never heard and somehow understood. And then he was somewhere else. A cavern, vast and glittering. Its walls lined with crystals that glowed with an inner light. He stood in the center of it, and he was no longer small. He was tall, powerful, his body wrapped in robes of deepest blue that shimmered with threads of silver and gold. At his side hung a sword that gleamed with the light of 1,000 suns. Before him knelt a dragon. It was immense, its scales the color of obsidian, its eyes burning coals, its wings folded against its back like a cloak of shadow. And yet it bowed to him. It called him Lord, Master, King. The vision shifted. Now he stood in a city of impossible beauty, towers of crystal and gold that rose into a sky filled with 2 moons. Creatures of every shape and size walked its streets, goblins and elves, beasts that walked like men, spirits of fire and water and earth. They smiled at him, waved at him, called out greetings in voices thick with affection. Rimuru-sama. Welcome home. The name echoed through him, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest, a warmth that was love, pure and untainted. These were his people. This was his home. The vision shifted again. Now he was fighting, a battle against something vast and terrible, a foe made of shadows and malice. Magic crackled around him, lightning and fire and power so immense it made the ground tremble. His people fought beside him, and they were losing. He could see it in their faces, the fear and desperation, the knowledge that they were outmatched. And then he made a choice. He reached deep inside himself, to a place he'd never touched before, and he pulled. Power surged through him, raw and wild, and he screamed as it tore through his body, reshaping him, remaking him. The shadows screamed too, and they died, but so did he. The vision shattered. Harry gasped and sat up, his chest heaving. He was back in the cupboard, back in his small body, but everything was different now. The darkness that had pressed against him was gone, and in its place was a clarity he'd never known. The grief was still there, the ache in his heart for a home he'd never known, but now it was joined by something else. Something that burned in his chest like a second heart, warm and golden and alive. He remembered. Not everything, not yet. The memories were like fragments of a broken mirror, scattered and sharp. But he remembered enough. He remembered the name Rimuru. He remembered the voice of a dragon, calling him master. He remembered a city of impossible beauty and a people who loved him. He remembered power, vast and terrible and magnificent, and the choice he'd made to save those he loved. He remembered dying. And he remembered being reborn. Harry, Rimuru, closed his eyes and breathed. The world around him was different now. He could feel it in a way he never had before, the pulse of life in the wood of the cupboard door, the whisper of magic in the air, the distant thrum of something vast and ancient that slumbered beneath the earth. He could feel the Dursleys sleeping upstairs, their lives a dim flicker compared to the blaze of his own existence. He could feel himself. And what he felt made him want to laugh and weep at the same time. Power coiled inside him, more power than he'd ever dreamed of. It was quiet, restrained, muffled by the limitations of his small body, but it was there. He could feel it waiting, patient and eternal, ready to answer his call. The being had called it a seal. A barrier placed on his soul to prevent his power from destroying this fragile world before he was ready to control it. It would take time to break through, months, perhaps years, but the seal was already weakening. Already, he could feel cracks forming in its surface, tiny fissures through which his power seeped. He reached up and touched his scar. It was warm beneath his fingers, pulsing with a faint heat that hadn't been there before. The being had touched it, had done something to it, and now it felt different. Less like a wound and more like a key. You were not meant to bear the burden of another's hatred, the being had said, its voice fading as the vision ended. The fragment of the Dark Lord that clings to you will serve as a bridge, a connection to the magic of this world. Use it wisely, child. It is both gift and curse. Harry didn't understand what that meant. But he would. He had time, years, if the being was to be believed, and he would use every moment of it to learn, to grow, to become what he had once been. And then he would find a way home. The morning brought chaos. Harry had barely closed his eyes before the cupboard door was yanked open, and Aunt Petunia's shrill voice cut through the air like a knife. Boy! Get up! There's work to be done. Harry sat up, blinking in the sudden light, and for a moment, just a moment, he almost laughed. He'd faced down armies, bargained with gods, commanded legions of monsters and men. And now he was being shouted at by a woman who couldn't boil an egg without burning the kitchen down. This is my life now, he thought, and the absurdity of it was almost too much to bear. Still, he rose. He'd lived in this world for 6 years, he knew the rules. The Dursleys expected obedience, and until he understood the full extent of his power, obedience was the safest course. It was also the hardest. Every instinct screamed at him to fight back, to lash out with the power that hummed beneath his skin, to teach these petty mortals the meaning of fear. But he was not just Rimuru Tempest. He was also Harry Potter, and Harry had learned long ago that fighting the Dursleys only made things worse. So he swallowed his pride and followed his aunt into the kitchen. The day passed in a blur of chores. Harry scrubbed the floors, polished the silver, mowed the lawn, and did everything else his aunt and uncle demanded of him. His body ached with exhaustion by the time evening fell, but his mind was sharper than ever. He observed. The Dursleys were ordinary, painfully, profoundly ordinary. They lived in a bubble of their own making, blind to the magic that swirled around them, oblivious to the truth of the world beyond their carefully manicured lawn. They were small-minded and cruel, and they would never understand what they had taken in. But Harry, Rimuru, understood. He understood that the Dursleys were not his enemy. They were obstacles, annoyances, thorns in his side, but they were not worthy of his hatred. They were like ants, scurrying about their tiny lives, unaware of the storm that was coming. And yet, as he knelt in the garden, pulling weeds under the blazing sun, he couldn't quite bring himself to forgive them. The years of neglect, the beatings, the starvation, they had shaped him, marked him in ways that even his returning memories couldn't erase. One day, he promised himself, when I am strong enough, I will make them understand. I will show them what they could have had, if they had only been kind. It was a childish thought, and he knew it. But he allowed himself to hold on to it, just for a moment. It made the pain easier to bear. The first crack in the seal came 3 days later. Harry was in the garden again, pulling weeds and trying to ignore the blistering heat, when something inside him shifted. It was like a muscle that had been tensed for too long suddenly relaxing, a release of pressure he hadn't even realized he'd been holding. Power flooded through him, warm and electric, and he gasped as it settled into his bones like an old friend. The world around him sharpened, colors growing brighter, sounds clearer. He could feel the earth beneath his feet, the pulse of life in the grass and flowers, the distant hum of the city miles away. And then he felt something else. A presence, vast and cold, coiled around his soul like a serpent. It whispered to him, words that were not words, promises of power and glory. It knew his name, both of his names, and it hated him with a hatred that burned like ice. Rimuru Tempest. So the Demon Lord has found his way to my world. How inconvenient. Harry's breath caught in his throat. The voice was sickly and sweet, like poison honey, and it made his skin crawl in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. Who are you? He thought, and he felt the presence chuckle, a cold, mirthless sound that sent a shiver down his spine. I am the one who marked you, child. I am the one who killed your parents and tried to kill you. I am the Dark Lord, and I am not pleased to find you still alive. The hatred in that voice was so pure, so absolute, that Harry felt his own anger rise in response. He was not a child. He was a demon lord, the king of a nation of monsters, and he would not be mocked by some two-bit sorcerer who couldn't even finish the job he'd started. You're nothing, Harry thought, and he put every ounce of his power behind the words. A shadow clinging to a fragment of my soul. You couldn't kill me when I was a baby, and you couldn't kill me now. I will end you, Voldemort. I will. He was cut off by a surge of pain, so sudden and intense that he collapsed to his knees. The presence in his mind laughed, cruel and triumphant, and then it was gone, leaving Harry gasping in the dirt. He'd pushed too hard. The seal on his power was still mostly intact, and the fragment of Voldemort's soul that lurked in his scar had used that against him, turning his own power back on him. But he'd learned something. The fragment of the Dark Lord's soul, the Horcrux, his memory supplied, though he didn't know how he knew that word, was a weakness. It was a tether, a connection that Voldemort could exploit to hurt him. But it was also a connection to Voldemort. A way to find him, to track him, to destroy him. Use it wisely, child, the being had said. It is both gift and curse. Harry rose to his feet, brushing the dirt from his knees. His body still ached from the backlash, but his mind was clear. He knew now what he was dealing with, and that knowledge gave him power. Voldemort was strong. He was cunning and ruthless, a wizard of immense power and ambition. But he was also mortal, or as mortal as a being who had torn his soul apart could be. And mortal things could be killed. Harry, Rimuru, smiled, and there was nothing childish in that smile. I will end you, he thought, and this time there was no anger in the words, only cold certainty. I will end you, and I will take back what you stole from me. The Hogwarts letter arrived on the 1st of August. Harry had been sitting in the garden, watching the clouds drift across the sky, when an owl appeared out of nowhere, swooping down to land on the fence beside him. It was a beautiful creature, white as snow, its eyes intelligent and watchful. It carried a letter in its beak, a letter of thick parchment, sealed with crimson wax. Harry took the letter with trembling hands. His fingers traced the seal, a lion, a snake, a badger, and an eagle surrounding a letter H, and he felt a thrill run through him. He knew what this was. He'd been waiting for it, hoping for it, even though he hadn't known why. Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The address was written in elegant green ink, and Harry had to laugh. Even the wizarding world, it seemed, had a sense of humor. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the words with a hunger he couldn't quite explain. Dear Mr. Potter. We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry read the letter 3 times, his heart pounding in his chest. The words seemed to glow on the page, written with a magic that sang to something deep inside him. Hogwarts. A school of magic. He knew, somehow, that this was where he was meant to be. Not just as Harry Potter, the boy who lived, but as Rimuru Tempest, the demon lord. This was the place where he would learn to control his power, to unlock the secrets of this world's magic, to become strong enough to face the enemies that awaited him. And there were enemies. He knew that now. The being had shown him glimpses of the future, a shadow war against a dark wizard who sought to conquer the world, a battle that would determine the fate of magic itself. But Harry would be ready. He would be more than ready. He would be unstoppable. The owl hooted softly, nudging his hand with its beak, and Harry reached up to stroke its feathers. The creature leaned into his touch, and he felt a flicker of warmth, a connection that was more than just animal instinct. Thank you, he whispered, and the owl hooted again, as if in understanding. He tucked the letter into his pocket and rose to his feet. The garden seemed brighter now, the flowers more vibrant, the air sweeter. The world was changing, and so was he. But before he could step into that new world, he had to deal with the Dursleys. Vernon Dursley was not a man who handled surprises well. Harry had expected the explosion. He had counted on it, even. His uncle had always been predictable: anger, threats, bluster, and violence. It was a formula Harry had learned to navigate with the precision of a master strategist. But this time, the stakes were different. "You will not go to this school," Vernon thundered, his face the color of an overripe tomato. "I will not have my son, my household, associated with your kind. You will stay here, and you will be grateful for the roof over your head." Harry watched his uncle's performance with detached interest. The man was practically frothing at the mouth, his finger jabbing the air as if he could physically strike Harry down with his fury. It would have been comical, if it weren't so pathetic. But Harry had no intention of staying. "You can't stop me," he said quietly. The words were simple, unadorned, and they carried a weight that made Vernon pause. "The letter says I have to go. Hogwarts is a school, and I have a place there. You can't keep me from it." "I can, and I will," Vernon roared. "I am your guardian, and I say, I don't care." The words cut through the air like a blade, and Harry felt his power stir beneath his skin. He suppressed it with an effort. He wasn't ready to reveal his full nature, not yet, but he let a fraction of his presence show. Vernon took a step back. It was a small thing, barely a movement, but Harry saw it. Saw the flicker of fear in his uncle's eyes, the sudden shift in his posture from aggressive to defensive. It was the first time in Harry's life that Vernon had ever looked afraid of him. "I don't care," Harry repeated, and his voice was cold now, as cold as the winter wind. "I don't care what you think, or what you want, or what you threaten. I am going to Hogwarts, and there is nothing you can do to stop me. The school will have people coming to help me prepare. You can either cooperate, or you can try to fight them. But I promise you, Uncle Vernon, you will not win." The silence that followed was deafening. Petunia was frozen in the doorway, her hands clasped over her mouth. Dudley had stopped eating his breakfast, his eyes wide and confused. Even the cat had fled the room. And Vernon, for the first time in his life, had nothing to say. Harry turned away from them, walking out of the kitchen and up the stairs to his cupboard. He'd said what he needed to say. Now he had to prepare. He had a feeling that the next few weeks were going to be very interesting. The weeks that followed were indeed interesting. Harry spent his days in a state of barely suppressed excitement, counting down the days until September 1st. He wrote to Hogwarts, asking about supplies, and received a letter back with a list of books and materials. He spent hours poring over the list, memorizing every item, imagining the worlds that awaited him. He also spent time practicing. The crack in the seal had grown wider, and with each passing day, Harry could feel more of his power becoming accessible. He experimented cautiously, testing the limits of what he could do. He discovered that he could move objects with his mind, that he could sense the emotions of those around him, that he could speak to animals and have them understand him. He also discovered that he could shapeshift. It was a small thing, at first, a minor adjustment to his appearance, altering the color of his eyes or the shape of his nose. But it was a taste of what was to come, and it made Harry's heart sing. The being had been right. The seal was weakening, and with time, he would regain everything he had lost. The power of Rimuru Tempest was returning, and soon, the world would know what it meant to face a demon lord. But Harry was careful. He didn't reveal his abilities to anyone, not even the Dursleys. He played the part of the meek, obedient boy, the same role he'd been playing for 6 years. It grated on him, pretending to be helpless when he could feel the power surging beneath his skin, but he understood the need for caution. The wizarding world was waiting for him. Voldemort was waiting for him. And he would not give them any advantage. The day before he was to leave for Hogwarts, Harry visited the garden one last time. It was dusk, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple, and the air was still and warm. Harry sat on the grass, his back against the old apple tree, and closed his eyes. He could feel the power within him, pulsing like a second heartbeat. It was stronger now, more alive, and it called to him in a language he was only beginning to understand. It sang of wind and sky, of earth and fire, of the vast, infinite magic that bound the world together. It was the magic of Rimuru Tempest. And it was the magic of Harry Potter. They were one and the same, intertwined like two rivers merging into a single, unstoppable current. The being had said that he needed to learn to control his power, to master the magic of this world before he could fully return to what he had once been. But Harry understood now that there was no separation between the two. His demon lord abilities and his wizarding magic were not different things. They were simply different expressions of the same force, the same truth. He would become stronger than he had ever been. He would protect this world, just as he had protected the one he'd left behind. He would be the demon lord of Tempest, the king of monsters, and he would be the boy who lived. And he would not fail. Harry opened his eyes and looked up at the stars, just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He smiled, and the power within him stirred, whispering his name. Rimuru Tempest, he said softly, and the words tasted like victory. Harry Potter. It doesn't matter which name I use. I am both, and I am one. And I am going to change the world. The stars seemed to shine brighter at his words, and Harry laughed, a sound of pure, unbridled joy. The future was waiting. And it was going to be magnificent. Chapter 2, The Boy Beyond Magic. The platform was empty. Harry stood at King's Cross Station, his trunk at his feet, Hedwig's cage in his hand, and stared at the solid brick wall between platforms 9 and 10. The Dursleys had dropped him off with a sneer and a muttered curse, abandoning him to find his own way. They hadn't even bothered to wait until he'd found the platform. And now here he was. Alone. Confused. And very, very aware that he was supposed to be somewhere else. The letter had been clear. Platform 9 3/4. But there was no platform between 9 and 10. Just a wall, ordinary and unremarkable, covered in the same grimy brick as the rest of the station. Harry closed his eyes and reached out with his senses. The magic was there, thrumming beneath the surface of the wall like a heartbeat. He could feel it, warm and inviting, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his own. It was a barrier, a veil between the mundane world and the magical one, and it recognized him. Of course, he thought, and a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. A magical barrier. How obvious. He gathered his things, took a deep breath, and walked straight at the wall. The sensation was strange, like passing through a curtain of warm water, or stepping into a room that was slightly too warm. For a moment, the world blurred around him, colors bleeding together in a swirl of gray and gold. And then it cleared, and he was standing in a different place entirely. The platform was bustling with people, families with children, all of them dressed in robes or carrying wands. Owls hooted from their cages, cats meowed from their carriers, and a toad croaked from somewhere to his left. The air was thick with magic, and Harry breathed it in like a man dying of thirst. He was home. The train was magnificent. Harry found an empty compartment near the back of the Hogwarts Express and settled in, stowing his trunk and Hedwig's cage on the overhead rack. The compartment was cozy, with plush seats and a window that looked out onto the countryside. He sat by the window, watching the station grow smaller as the train began to move, and let himself feel the excitement that had been building for weeks. This was it. This was the beginning of everything. The door slid open, and a boy poked his head in. He was round-faced and nervous, with mousy brown hair and a slightly damp appearance, as if he'd been crying. "Sorry," the boy said, his voice trembling. "I'm looking for, well, I was looking for a toad, actually. My toad. He's gone missing. Have you seen him? He's a toad. Named Trevor." Harry blinked. "I haven't seen any toads. But I'll keep an eye out." "Thanks," the boy said, and his face brightened slightly. "I'm Neville, by the way. Neville Longbottom. Harry Potter." Neville's eyes went wide. "Harry Potter? The Harry Potter?" He stared at Harry for a long moment, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. I heard, everyone's been talking about you. You're famous, you know." Harry felt a flicker of irritation, quickly suppressed. "I've heard that." "You don't look like I expected," Neville continued, seemingly unaware of Harry's discomfort. I thought you'd be. I don't know. Taller. More impressive. Harry laughed despite himself. Well, I'm only 11. Give me a few years. Neville laughed too, and the tension in the compartment eased. He sat down across from Harry, still clutching the edge of his seat as if he might fall off at any moment. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to stare. It's just, you're Harry Potter. You're the reason the Dark Lord is gone. Everyone knows your story. Harry's smile faded. Everyone knows a story. That doesn't mean it's true. What do you mean? Neville asked, looking confused. Harry shook his head. Nothing. Never mind. Tell me about Hogwarts. What's it like? Neville's face lit up, and he launched into an enthusiastic description of the castle, the grounds, the professors, the ghosts. Harry listened, asking questions when appropriate, and let the boy's excitement wash over him. It was good, he decided, to have someone to talk to. Someone who didn't hate him, who didn't fear him, who didn't treat him like a curiosity or a threat. Neville was just Neville. And that was nice. The trolley which came by a few hours later, and Harry bought a selection of sweets, chocolate frogs, cauldron cakes, pumpkin pasties, and something called Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. He shared them with Neville, and they spent the rest of the journey eating and talking and watching the countryside rush by. It was the most peaceful afternoon Harry had had in years. But the peace didn't last. The door slid open again, and this time the visitor was not a nervous boy looking for his toad. It was a girl with bushy brown hair and a bossy expression, carrying a stack of books that looked almost as heavy as she did. Has anyone seen a toad? She demanded. A boy named Neville's lost one. Neville raised his hand sheepishly. That's me. I'm Neville. The girl's eyes narrowed. You're Neville. You lost your toad. How do you lose a toad? Well, he just disappeared. Neville's face flushed red. The girl sighed, rolling her eyes in a way that suggested this was a very common occurrence. Honestly, you'd think you'd be more careful. Toads aren't exactly known for their speed. You can't just lose one. Maybe he didn't want to be found, Harry offered, and the girl turned her sharp gaze on him. Who are you? Harry Potter. The girl's eyes widened. Harry Potter. The Harry Potter. I've read about you. All about you. You're in modern magical history, and the rise and fall of the dark arts, and great wizarding events of the 20th century. You're famous. Harry sighed. So I've been told. I'm Hermione Granger, the girl continued, apparently undeterred by Harry's lack of enthusiasm. And I've been reading all about Hogwarts. I've memorized all the textbooks. I've been practicing spells. That's impressive, Harry said, and he meant it. Hermione Granger was clearly brilliant, and her intensity was almost overwhelming, but there was something about her that he couldn't help but like. Do you want to sit with us? Hermione hesitated, clearly torn between the desire to continue her search for Neville's toad and the opportunity to talk to the famous Harry Potter. In the end, she nodded and sat down, abandoning her mission with a reluctance that suggested she'd be back at it soon enough. The three of them talked for the rest of the journey, and Harry found himself enjoying their company. Neville was kind and earnest, Hermione was brilliant and intense, and they both seemed to accept him for who he was, a boy starting at a new school, just like them. It felt good. They arrived at Hogwarts as the sun was setting. The castle rose against the twilight sky like a dream made real, towers and turrets, windows glowing with warm light, walls of ancient stone that seemed to pulse with magic. Harry stared at it, his breath caught in his throat, and felt something deep inside him stir. This was where he was meant to be. He knew it with a certainty that went beyond logic. The first-year students were led to the castle by a giant of a man, Rubeus Hagrid, the gamekeeper, who Harry learned was the one who had brought him to the Dursleys as a baby. Hagrid's eyes were red with emotion when he saw Harry, and he pulled him into a crushing hug that left Harry gasping. Harry! Harry Potter! I can't believe it's really you. Hagrid boomed, and Harry found himself smiling despite the awkwardness. "You're so small. But you look just like your father, you do. Only your mother's eyes. You have her eyes." "Thank you, Hagrid," Harry managed, and he meant it. The first-year students were gathered in the entrance hall, waiting to be sorted. The room was magnificent, vast and torchlit, the ceiling so high it seemed to stretch into the night sky. Harry looked around, taking in the marble staircase, the suits of armor, the painted portraits that whispered to each other as he passed. It was magical. Truly, utterly magical. And then they were led into the great hall, and Harry's breath caught in his throat. The ceiling was enchanted to look like the night sky, stars twinkled overhead, and the candles floating above the 4 long tables seemed to drift in a gentle breeze. The tables themselves were laden with golden plates and goblets, and at the front of the hall stood a raised dais, where the professors sat watching the new arrivals. Harry felt the power in the room, the centuries of magic that had seeped into the very stones of the castle. It was old and deep and vast, and it welcomed him like an old friend. He was home. The sorting hat was old and battered, its fabric stained and frayed, but when it was placed on Harry's head, it came alive with a voice that spoke directly into his mind. "Ah, another Potter. I remember your father, you know. And your mother. They were both brave, both clever. But you're different." Harry felt the hat probe his mind, searching for his thoughts and feelings. He let it look, but he kept the deepest parts of himself hidden, the memories of Rimuru Tempest, the power that pulsed beneath his skin, the knowledge of what he truly was. "Interesting," the hat murmured. "Very interesting. You have ambition, and cunning, and a desire to prove yourself. You also have courage, and loyalty, and a fierce sense of justice. You could go anywhere, boy. Anywhere at all." "I don't want to go anywhere," Harry thought, and he was surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "I want to be where I belong. I want to be with people who will accept me for who I am." "And who are you?" the hat asked, and its voice was curious, probing. "Who are you, truly?" Harry didn't answer. He couldn't. He wasn't sure he knew the answer himself. "Very well," the hat said finally. "Then I will decide for you. It's Gryffindor." The hat shouted the last word, and the table on the far left erupted in cheers. Harry opened his eyes, smiling despite himself, and made his way to the Gryffindor table. He'd made his choice. Now he had to live with it. The first few weeks at Hogwarts were a revelation. Harry threw himself into his studies with an intensity that surprised even him. He devoured the textbooks, memorized the spells, practiced until his fingers were raw and his mind was exhausted. The magic of this world was different from the power he'd wielded as Rimuru Tempest, more structured, more precise, bound by rules and formulas that he had to learn to manipulate. But he was a quick study. In charms, he mastered the levitation charm on his first try, earning a surprised nod from Professor Flitwick. In transfiguration, he turned a matchstick into a needle with a flick of his wand, much to Professor McGonagall's astonishment. In potions, he brewed a perfect draught of living death, though he wisely chose not to show it to Professor Snape, who seemed to hate him for no reason he could discern. It was in defense against the dark arts that Harry truly excelled. Professor Quirrell was a nervous, stuttering man who seemed terrified of his own shadow, but the subject itself fascinated Harry. He had faced dark magic before, the fragment of Voldemort's soul that still clung to his scar was proof of that. He wanted to understand it, to learn how to defend against it, to master it. And so he practiced. He read every book he could find, asked questions that made his classmates stare at him in confusion, and pushed himself harder than anyone else in his year. But he never showed his full power. The seal on his Demon Lord abilities was still in place, and he was careful to keep his magic limited to what a first-year student should be capable of. He didn't want to attract attention, didn't want to reveal himself before he was ready. The wizarding world was full of secrets, and Harry was determined to keep his own. The other students noticed, of course. They noticed how quickly he learned, how easily he mastered spells that took others weeks. They whispered about him in the corridors, stared at him in the great hall, spread rumors that grew wilder with each telling. But Harry paid them no mind. He had friends now, Ron Weasley, who had joined him and Hermione at the Gryffindor table, and Neville, who was slowly growing less nervous with each passing day. They accepted him for who he was, and that was enough. Ron was loud and boisterous, with a quick temper and an even quicker laugh. He came from a large, chaotic family, and he talked about his parents and siblings with a fondness that made Harry's heart ache with longing. He didn't have much money, his robes were hand-me-downs, his wand was second-hand, and his pet rat, Scabbers, was missing a toe, but he had a fierce loyalty to his friends that Harry recognized and respected. Hermione was brilliant, but she was also lonely. She had read so many books, memorized so many facts, that she sometimes forgot that the world was full of things you couldn't learn from a page. She drove Harry and Ron crazy with her relentless studying, but she also stood up for them when the other students teased them, and she never failed to help when they needed it. They were an odd group, but they worked. And Harry was grateful for them. The first sign that something was wrong came during the Halloween feast. Harry had been enjoying the meal, laughing at Ron's jokes and trying to keep Hermione from lecturing them about the importance of studying for the upcoming exams. The great hall was filled with warmth and light, the enchanted ceiling reflecting the full moon that hung in the sky outside. And then the door burst open. Quirrell stumbled in, his face ashen, his stutter more pronounced than ever. Troll! Troll in the dungeons! I thought you should know. He collapsed, and the great hall erupted in chaos. Students screamed, professors shouted, and Dumbledore's voice cut through the noise like a knife. Silence! Everyone, stay calm. Prefects, lead your houses to the dormitories. I will handle this. But Harry wasn't listening. He was focused on something else, a voice, faint and cold, that whispered in the back of his mind. The girl is alone. The mudblood is in the bathroom. She is vulnerable, unprotected. Go to her. Kill her. It was Voldemort's voice. Harry recognized it immediately, the same voice that had spoken to him in the garden. And it was telling him to kill Hermione. He didn't think. He just acted. Ron, come on, he shouted, grabbing Ron by the arm and dragging him away from the table. Hermione's still in the bathroom. We have to find her. What? Harry, what are you? Ron started, but Harry was already running, pulling Ron behind him. They raced through the corridors, dodging panicked students and professors. Their footsteps echoing against the stone walls. Harry could feel the troll's presence, a massive, lumbering thing, radiating magical energy like a beacon in the dark. It was moving toward the bathroom, and Hermione was in its path. They arrived just in time. The troll was enormous, easily 12 feet tall, with gray, lumpy skin and a club the size of a small tree. It was smashing its way through the bathroom, splintering stalls and sinks, and in the corner, cowering behind a broken partition, was Hermione. Harry didn't hesitate. He reached deep inside himself, to the power that simmered beneath his skin, and he pulled. The troll froze. It wasn't a spell, not exactly. It was something older, something more primal. Harry projected his will at the creature, and the troll's primitive mind buckled under the weight of it. It dropped its club, swayed on its feet, and let out a low, confused moan. Harry, what did you do? Ron asked, his voice shaking. What was that? Harry didn't answer. He was focused on the troll, on the flicker of fear he could sense in its mind. It was terrified of him, and it had every right to be. Leave, Harry said, and his voice was cold, commanding. Leave now, and never come back. The troll fled. It crashed through the bathroom door and lumbered down the corridor, and the sound of its retreating footsteps faded into silence. Harry stood in the wreckage of the bathroom, his heart pounding, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He'd done it. He'd used his power, and he'd saved Hermione. But now, he had to face the consequences. The aftermath was chaotic. Professors swarmed the bathroom, demanding to know what had happened. Harry and Ron told a version of the truth, that they'd gone looking for Hermione, found the troll, and managed to distract it until help arrived. Hermione backed them up, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with shock. But Harry could feel their suspicion. McGonagall's eyes lingered on him a moment too long, and Snape's gaze was sharp and calculating. They knew something wasn't right. They just didn't know what. 10 points will be deducted from Gryffindor, McGonagall said finally, her voice sharp. For your recklessness. And for endangering yourselves and your classmates. She paused, and a faint smile crossed her face. And for your bravery, I will award you each 5 points. Now get to bed. Harry, Ron, and Hermione walked back to the Gryffindor common room in silence. They didn't speak until they were safely inside, the portrait of the fat lady closing behind them. What happened in there? Ron asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What did you do to that troll? Harry shook his head. I don't know. I wanted it to leave, and it did. That's not normal, Hermione said. She was looking at Harry with a mixture of awe and concern. Trolls are immune to most spells. You can't just tell them to go away and expect them to listen. I know, Harry said, and he felt a chill run down his spine. I know. He didn't tell them the truth. He couldn't. Not yet. But he knew, with a certainty that settled into his bones like ice, that the seal on his power was weakening faster than he'd anticipated. And that the world would soon have to reckon with what he truly was. The dream started after Halloween. Harry would fall asleep, exhausted from his studies, and find himself standing in a vast, dark chamber. The walls were lined with torches that flickered with green flame, and in the center of the room stood a figure, tall and snake-like, with red eyes and a face that was more serpent than man. Voldemort. He would smile, cold and cruel, and speak in a voice that made Harry's blood freeze. So, the child awakens. I felt your power, boy. I felt it surge when you fought the troll. You are stronger than I thought. Stronger than any wizard your age has any right to be. I'm not a wizard, Harry would say, his voice echoing in the darkness. I'm something more. Voldemort would laugh, a terrible, rasping sound that sent shivers down Harry's spine. You think you're more. You are nothing. A child playing with power he doesn't understand. I have seen the mark on your soul, Harry Potter. You carry a piece of me within you. And one day, I will use that piece to destroy you. You can try, Harry would say, and there was no fear in his voice, only cold defiance. But you will fail. Just as you failed before. Just as you will always fail. And then the dream would shatter, and Harry would wake gasping, his hand pressed to his scar. The mark burned with a heat that was both familiar and foreign, and Harry knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that Voldemort was getting closer. He had to be ready. Harry began training in secret. Every night, after Ron and Neville had fallen asleep, Harry would slip out of the dormitory and find a quiet corner of the castle. He would practice his spells, push the boundaries of his magic, and probe the edges of the seal that bound his power. The seal was weakening. He could feel it cracking, the fissures spreading like spiderwebs across its surface. With each passing day, more of his demon lord abilities became accessible, and Harry used them with increasing confidence. He learned to sense the magic around him, to feel the flow of power in the walls and floors. He learned to project his will, to influence the minds of the creatures he encountered. He learned to manipulate the elements, to call fire and water and wind with a gesture. But the power was dangerous. He could feel it pulling at him, tempting him, whispering that he didn't need to hide any longer. He could take what he wanted. He could destroy anyone who stood in his way. Harry resisted. He remembered what the being had told him, that this world was fragile, and that his power could break it if he wasn't careful. He remembered the grief of losing his home, the weight of the choice he'd made. He would not repeat his mistakes. But the temptation was always there. The Quidditch match against Slytherin was a disaster. Harry had been flying well, better than well, he'd been flying like he was born to it. The broom felt like an extension of his body, responding to his every thought, and he'd managed to catch the snitch in record time. But then the broom had started bucking. It was possessed, Harry realized. Someone was hexing it, trying to throw him off. He could feel the magic clinging to the handle, dark and cold, and he knew immediately who was responsible. Snape, he thought, his eyes darting to the professor's box. Snape is hexing my broom. But as he looked closer, he saw something that made him pause. Snape's lips were moving, his wand pointed at Harry under his robes. But his eyes weren't focused on Harry, they were focused on Quirrell, who was muttering under his breath and staring at Harry with an intensity that was almost predatory. Quirrell was the one doing it. Quirrell was the one trying to kill him. Harry's anger flared. He was not going to let this happen, not to him, not now. He was too close to discovering the truth about Voldemort, too close to achieving his goals. He would not be taken out by some cowardly professor. He reached deep inside himself, to the power that had saved him from the troll, and he pushed. The hex shattered. Harry felt the magic break, felt it recoil as his own power overwhelmed it. Quirrell gasped, clutching his chest as if he'd been struck, and Harry smirked. He'd won. But the battle was far from over. The discovery of the Philosopher's Stone was the final straw. Harry had been looking for Fluffy, the three-headed dog that guarded the trapdoor on the third floor, when he'd stumbled upon a hidden chamber filled with enchanted mirrors. The mirror showed him his greatest desire, himself, surrounded by people who loved him, standing tall and proud in the hall of his people. But it was the message in the mirror that truly caught his attention. Only one who seeks the stone but does not use it will find it. Harry understood immediately. The stone was hidden behind a challenge that required selflessness, a test of character rather than skill. And he knew, with a certainty that burned in his chest, that he was the only one who could pass it. But he also knew that Voldemort was after the stone. He'd felt the Dark Lord's presence in the castle, sensed his influence in the shadows. And he knew that Voldemort would stop at nothing to claim the stone's power. The battle was coming. And Harry would face it alone. The final confrontation was everything Harry had imagined and more. He stood in the underground chamber, facing a mirror that showed him his heart's desire. Quirrell stood before him, but he was no longer the stuttering professor. He was something else, something dark and terrible, possessed by the spirit of Voldemort himself. "Give me the stone, Harry," Quirrell hissed, his voice a blend of his own and Voldemort's. "Give it to me, and I will spare your life." Harry shook his head. "No. I won't. You think you can stop me?" Quirrell laughed, and it was a horrible sound. "You are a child. A foolish, arrogant child. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Harry said, and he felt his power surge. "I know who you are. I know what you've done. And I know that you will fail." Quirrell lunged, his hands reaching for Harry's throat. But Harry was ready. He brought his own hands up, and the power that pulsed within him erupted in a blinding flash of light. Quirrell screamed. His hands were burning, blistered and blackened where they'd touched Harry's skin. He stumbled back, his face contorted in agony, and the shrieking voice of Voldemort echoed in the chamber. "Kill him. Kill him now." But Quirrell couldn't. Every time he touched Harry, he was burned, his flesh seared by a power he couldn't comprehend. He fell to his knees, his screams fading to whimpers, and Harry watched as the life faded from his eyes. And then Voldemort fled. Harry stood in the chamber, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart pounding in his chest. The stone was in his hand, he'd grabbed it during the struggle, and he could feel its power pulsing against his palm. He'd won. But the victory felt hollow. He'd faced Voldemort, and he'd survived. But the Dark Lord was still out there, waiting, plotting. The war was far from over. Dumbledore's office was warm and cluttered, filled with strange instruments and portraits that slept peacefully in their frames. Harry sat in a chair across from the headmaster's desk, a cup of tea cooling in his hands. "You have done well, Harry," Dumbledore said, his blue eyes twinkling behind his half-moon spectacles. "Better than well. You have faced the Dark Lord and emerged victorious. That is no small feat." Harry nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the power he'd used, the power that had burned Quirrell's hands. It had been pure, a light that had repelled Voldemort's darkness. "I don't understand," Harry said. "How did I do it? How did I stop him?" Dumbledore's expression grew serious. You know, of course, that Voldemort's attack on you left a mark. A scar. But it also left something else, a connection between you and the Dark Lord. A connection that gives you some of his power, but also protects you from him. The magic that saved you when you were a baby still lingers in your blood. It is a protection, Harry. A gift from your mother. Harry frowned. So it was my mother's magic that stopped him. In part, Dumbledore agreed. But I suspect there is more to it than that. There is something inside you, Harry. Something ancient and powerful. I have felt it in the castle's wards, in the way the magic responds to your presence. You are not just a wizard. You are something more. Harry's heart raced. Dumbledore knew. Somehow, the old headmaster had sensed the truth. I don't know what you're talking about, Harry said, and the lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Dumbledore smiled, but it was a sad smile, the smile of someone who knows more than they're willing to say. You will, Harry. In time, you will understand. But for now, you should rest. You have earned it. Harry rose from his chair and walked to the door. But before he left, he turned back. Professor, he said. The Philosopher's Stone. What will happen to it now? Dumbledore's smile widened. It will be destroyed. The Flammels have agreed that it is too dangerous to keep. The stone will be no more. Harry nodded and left the office. As he walked back to the Gryffindor common room, he felt the weight of the night's events settle on his shoulders. He'd faced Voldemort and survived. He'd used his power and triumphed. But the battle was far from over. The Dark Lord was still out there, and he would return. And when he did, Harry would be ready. He had to be. Because the fate of the wizarding world, and the world beyond, depended on him. Chapter 3, The Rise of Tempest Magic. The summer after first year was a crucible of fire and silence. Harry returned to Privet Drive with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. The Dursleys received him with their usual cold indifference, but something had shifted in the dynamic between them. They no longer looked at him with mere contempt, there was fear in their eyes now, a wariness that hadn't been there before. They kept their distance, spoke to him only when necessary, and seemed almost relieved when he retreated to his cupboard. Harry didn't mind. The cupboard had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where he could think without interruption. He spent his days in a state of focused meditation, probing the edges of the seal that bound his power, feeling the cracks widen with each passing week. The seal was almost gone. He could feel it crumbling like ancient stone, fragments of the barrier falling away to reveal the power beneath. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. The power of Rimuru Tempest was vast beyond measure, the ability to manipulate matter, to bend reality, to command the very fabric of existence. It was the power of a demon lord, a being who had transcended the limits of mortal magic. And it was his. But Harry was careful. He practiced in secret, deep in the woods behind Privet Drive, where no one could see him. He tested his abilities in small ways, shifting the shape of a stone, calling fire to his palm, sensing the life force of the creatures around him. Each success brought him closer to understanding what he truly was. And each success brought him closer to the moment when he would have to reveal himself. The letter from Hogwarts arrived on Harry's 12th birthday, along with a package from an unexpected source. Harry sat on his bed in the cupboard, the letter in his hands, and stared at the contents of the package. It was a book, an ancient, leather-bound tome with pages that seemed to glow with a faint light. The cover was embossed with a symbol he recognized, the mark of Tempest, a stylized storm cloud surrounded by a ring of stars. His heart raced. This was no ordinary book. This was a gift from someone who knew who he truly was. He opened the book, and a letter fell out. Dear Harry. I know you have questions. I know you are confused about what you are becoming. I cannot give you all the answers, some things must be discovered on your own. But I can give you this. The book is a record of the old magic, the magic that existed before wizards learned to tame it with wands and words. It is the magic of the earth, the sky, the sea. It is the magic of the soul. I believe it will help you understand the power you carry within you. Use it wisely, Harry. The world is changing, and you have a role to play in that change. Yours sincerely. A friend. Harry read the letter 3 times, his mind racing. Who had sent this? Who knew about his power? The letter was unsigned, but the handwriting was elegant and old-fashioned, the words written with a quill in dark green ink. He didn't know who the sender was. But he knew, with a certainty that settled into his bones like old knowledge, that he could trust them. He opened the book and began to read. The book was called the Tempest Grimoire, and it was unlike anything Harry had ever encountered. It wasn't a textbook in the traditional sense. There were no spells to memorize, no wand movements to practice. Instead, the book was a collection of philosophical writings, meditations on the nature of magic and the soul. It spoke of the old ways, the primal magic that had existed before the wizarding world had codified its practices. Harry devoured the book in a matter of days. He learned about the 3 pillars of Tempest magic: creation, destruction, and transformation. Creation was the power to bring something into being, to shape reality according to one's will. Destruction was the power to unmake, to return something to its constituent parts. And transformation was the power to change, to evolve, to become something new. These were the abilities of a demon lord, the book explained. But they were also the abilities of any being who had mastered the old magic. The ancient wizards had understood this. They had wielded power without wands, without incantations, without the constraints of modern spellcasting. They had been closer to the source of magic, and they had been feared for it. Harry understood now why the wizarding world had turned away from the old magic. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and powerful beyond measure. It was the kind of power that could destroy nations, topple empires, reshape reality itself. It was the kind of power that could defeat Voldemort. Harry smiled, and there was something ancient in that smile, something that had nothing to do with the 11-year-old boy who had once cowered in a cupboard. He was no longer just Harry Potter. He was Rimuru Tempest, the demon lord of Tempest, and he was ready to claim his birthright. But first, he had to master the old magic. The summer passed in a blur of study and practice. Harry spent his days in the woods, experimenting with the principles he'd learned from the grimoire. He learned to create fire from nothing, to shape stone with his will, to communicate with the animals that lived in the forest. He learned to sense the flow of magic in the world around him, to see the threads of power that connected all things. And he learned to control his demon lord abilities. The seal was almost completely gone now. With each passing day, Harry could feel more of his power becoming accessible. He could transform his appearance, shifting his features to match his will. He could summon weapons from thin air, blades of shadow and light that sang with power. He could even, in moments of intense focus, create small portals to other places. It was exhilarating. And it was terrifying. Because with the power came the memories. Harry remembered now, not all of them, but enough. He remembered the city of Tempest, the monsters who had called him Lord, the battles he'd fought and the sacrifices he'd made. He remembered the dragon, Veldora, who had been his friend and ally. He remembered the goblins and elves and spirits who had loved him. And he remembered the choice he'd made. The choice to save his people, to give his life for theirs. He remembered dying. And he remembered being reborn. The grief of that memory was overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion that threatened to drown him. Harry would sit in the woods, tears streaming down his face, and mourn a world he could never return to. He would whisper the names of his people into the silence, hoping that somehow, somewhere, they could hear him. But he also remembered the hope. The hope that one day, he would find a way back. The hope that the bonds he'd forged would transcend the boundaries of time and space. The hope that he was not alone. And that hope, more than anything else, kept him going. The second year at Hogwarts began with a disaster. Harry arrived at King's Cross to find the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 sealed. He stood in the middle of the station, his trunk at his feet, and watched as families streamed past him, oblivious to his predicament. He should have been panicking. He was going to miss the train, miss the start of term, miss everything he'd been looking forward to. But instead of panic, Harry felt a flicker of amusement. This is a test, he thought. Someone is testing me. He closed his eyes and reached out with his senses. The barrier was there, humming with magical energy, but it was also blocked by something, a spell, dark and subtle, woven to prevent anyone from passing through. Harry smiled. This was a challenge. And challenges were meant to be overcome. He reached deep inside himself, to the power that pulsed beneath his skin, and he pushed. The spell unraveled like a thread pulled from a tapestry, and the barrier shimmered back into existence. Harry stepped through and found himself on platform 9 3/4, exactly where he was supposed to be. The train was waiting. The journey to Hogwarts was uneventful, but Harry couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air in the train was heavy, charged with a tension that made his skin prickle. He sat in a compartment with Ron and Hermione, trying to concentrate on their conversation, but his mind kept wandering. "Harry, are you listening?" Hermione asked, her voice sharp with frustration. "I was telling you about the new defense against the dark arts professor. His name is Gilderoy Lockhart, and he's written all these books about his adventures. He's supposed to be brilliant." Harry blinked. "Sorry, Hermione. I was just thinking." Ron snorted. "Thinking? That's dangerous. What were you thinking about?" "The barrier," Harry said. "At King's Cross. It was sealed. Someone blocked it." Ron and Hermione exchanged a glance. "What do you mean, sealed?" Ron asked. "The barrier's always there. It's just a wall." "It was blocked," Harry repeated. "With magic. Someone didn't want us to get through." The compartment fell silent. Ron's face had gone pale, and Hermione was frowning, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Who would do that?" Hermione asked. "Who would want to stop students from getting to Hogwarts?" Harry shook his head. "I don't know. But I intend to find out." The feast that night was magnificent, but Harry barely tasted the food. His mind was elsewhere, churning with questions. Who had blocked the barrier? And why? He looked around the great hall, his eyes scanning the faces of the professors. Dumbledore was smiling, his blue eyes twinkling as he watched the students eat. McGonagall was stern and composed, her gaze sharp as she surveyed the crowd. Snape was his usual unpleasant self, his black eyes glittering with barely concealed contempt. And then there was Lockhart. The new defense against the dark arts professor was a peacock of a man, all flash and charm. He wore robes of lilac silk, his golden hair perfectly coiffed, his smile as bright as the chandeliers overhead. He was handsome, Harry supposed, in a generic sort of way. But there was something about him that made Harry's skin crawl. The man was a fraud. Harry could sense it in the way he held himself, the way he spoke. There was no power behind his words, no substance to his stories. He was all surface, all glitter, and beneath the surface, there was nothing. Harry filed the observation away for later. He had more important things to worry about. The attack started a few weeks into term. It began with Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat. She was found petrified, hanging from a torch bracket, her eyes wide with terror. The message scrawled on the wall in blood-red paint sent a chill through the entire school. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. Harry felt the words like a punch to the gut. He knew what the Chamber of Secrets was, he'd read about it in Hogwarts, a history. It was a secret chamber hidden somewhere in the castle, built by Salazar Slytherin himself. According to legend, the chamber contained a monster that only the heir of Slytherin could control. And now, someone was using that monster to attack students. Harry's first instinct was to investigate. He had spent the summer learning to use his power, and he was confident in his ability to protect himself. But he also knew that he had to be careful. Revealing his abilities too soon could put him and his friends in danger. So he watched. He listened. And he waited. The attacks continued. Colin Creevey, a first-year boy who had been taking pictures of everyone, was found petrified. Justin Finch Fletchley, a Hufflepuff boy who had been arguing with Harry, was found petrified. Even Hermione's friend, Penelope Clearwater, was attacked. The school was in chaos. Students whispered in corners, their faces pale with fear. Professors patrolled the corridors, their wands drawn. And the heir of Slytherin, whoever they were, remained at large. Harry knew he had to act. But he didn't know where to start. The clue came from an unexpected source. Harry had been walking through the corridors late one night, unable to sleep, when he heard a voice. It was faint and hissing, like a snake speaking in a language that wasn't quite English. The voice was coming from the walls. Rip, tear, kill. Harry froze. The voice was full of malice, full of hunger. It was the voice of a predator, ancient and patient, searching for its prey. He followed the voice through the corridors, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice led him to the second floor, to a bathroom that had been abandoned for decades. The bathroom was covered in grime and cobwebs, the stalls sagging on their hinges, the sinks stained with rust. And in the center of the bathroom, one of the sinks was glowing. Harry approached it cautiously, his hand outstretched. The sink was carved with the image of a snake, its eyes glinting with a malevolent light. Harry touched the snake's head, and the sink began to move, sliding aside to reveal a dark, gaping hole. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets. Harry stared into the darkness, his breath caught in his throat. He knew what he had to do. He had to go down there, to find the monster, to stop it. But he also knew he couldn't do it alone. He turned and ran, heading back to the Gryffindor common room. He needed Ron and Hermione. He needed his friends. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Harry, Ron, and Hermione met in a common room late that night, their faces lit by the flickering fire. They had already discussed the situation, and they had reached a conclusion. The monster in the chamber was a basilisk, a giant serpent whose gaze could kill. "You can't look it in the eyes," Ron said, his face pale. "If you look it in the eyes, you're dead." Hermione nodded, her expression grim. "I've been reading about basilisks. They're incredibly dangerous. The only way to survive is to keep your eyes closed, or use a mirror to deflect its gaze." Harry felt a surge of hope. Mirrors. Of course. We can use mirrors to look at it without being petrified. The plan was set. Harry would go into the chamber with Ron and Hermione, using mirrors to avoid the basilisk's gaze. They would find the monster and, hopefully, find a way to defeat it. But Harry knew that the plan had a flaw. The basilisk was just a weapon. The real enemy was the person controlling it, the heir of Slytherin. And Harry had a feeling that he knew who that person was. The Chamber of Secrets was vast and dark, its walls covered in ancient carvings that told the story of Salazar Slytherin and his hatred for Muggle-born wizards. Harry walked through the tunnels, his wand held high, his senses on high alert. Ron and Hermione followed close behind, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They found the basilisk's lair at the end of a long tunnel, a cavern filled with the skeletons of its victims, the air thick with the smell of death. The basilisk itself was coiled in the center of the cavern, its scales glistening like polished obsidian, its eyes closed in slumber. Harry raised his mirror, ready to face the monster. But before he could act, a voice spoke from the shadows. "Harry Potter. So you found my chamber. How delightful." Harry whirled around, his wand pointed at the speaker. It was a boy his age, with dark hair and pale skin, his eyes glittering with malice. He was holding a wand, and he was smiling. "Tom Riddle," Harry said, and the name tasted bitter on his tongue. He'd heard the name before, in the memory of the diary. Tom Riddle was the boy who had opened the chamber 50 years ago. But how was he here, alive, in the present? Riddle laughed. "Not quite. I am the memory of Tom Riddle, preserved in this diary. And I am the one who has been controlling the attacks. I am the heir of Slytherin." Harry's blood ran cold. The diary. Ginny Weasley had been acting strangely, and now he knew why. She'd been possessed by Riddle, used as a vessel to carry out his plans. "Ginny," Harry said, his voice sharp. What did you do to her? Riddle smiled, and there was something cruel in that smile. She is in the chamber with us. I brought her here to serve a purpose. When I am finished with her, she will be dead. And you, Harry Potter, will be blamed for her death. Harry felt his power surge, the old magic rising within him like a tidal wave. He would not let this happen. He would not let Tom Riddle destroy another innocent life. You're wrong, Harry said, and his voice was cold. You're wrong about everything. You think you're the heir of Slytherin. You think you can control a basilisk. You're nothing but a memory. A ghost. And ghosts can be destroyed. He reached deep inside himself, to the power of Rimuru Tempest, and he pulled. The world exploded into light. The battle was swift and brutal. Harry faced Riddle and the basilisk simultaneously, his power flowing through him like a river. He created shields of pure magic, deflecting the basilisk's attacks. He summoned blades of shadow, cutting through the serpent's scales. He called fire from the air, burning away the darkness that surrounded them. But it was Riddle who was the true threat. The memory of Tom Riddle was more powerful than Harry had anticipated, a dark lord in miniature who wielded magic with a skill that belied his age. You cannot defeat me, Harry Potter, Riddle snarled, his wand slashing through the air. I am the heir of Slytherin. I am the most powerful wizard of my generation. You are nothing but a boy who got lucky. Harry smiled, and there was something ancient in that smile. You don't know what I am, Tom. You have no idea. He reached deep inside himself, to the seal that bound his power, and he shattered it. The force of the release was staggering. Power exploded from Harry in a wave of pure energy, shattering the walls, tearing through the darkness. He could feel the old magic rising, the power of creation and destruction and transformation all flowing through him at once. He was no longer just Harry Potter. He was Rimuru Tempest, the demon lord of Tempest, and he was magnificent. Riddle screamed as the power washed over him, his body dissolving into shadow. The basilisk roared, its scales cracking, its eyes burning with an unholy light. But Harry was relentless. He called forth the power of transformation and reshaped the basilisk's form, turning it from a creature of destruction into a harmless serpent. The battle was over. Harry stood in the center of the chamber, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body trembling with exhaustion. Ron and Hermione were staring at him, their faces pale with shock. But Harry couldn't focus on them. His attention was fixed on the shadows, where Riddle's memory had been destroyed. He had won. But the cost had been high. The seal was gone, shattered beyond repair. His power was now fully accessible, and the world would never be the same. The aftermath of the battle was chaos. Harry, Ron, and Hermione returned to the surface with Ginny, who was weak but alive. The professors were waiting, their faces a mixture of relief and alarm. The chamber had been sealed again, the basilisk defeated, and the heir of Slytherin exposed. But there were questions. So many questions. How did you defeat the basilisk? McGonagall asked, her eyes sharp with suspicion. No first-year student, no second-year student, should have been able to do what you did. Harry shook his head. I don't know, Professor. It just happened. I don't know how to explain it. It was a lie, and he knew it. But he couldn't tell the truth. Not yet. Dumbledore studied him with those ancient, knowing eyes. There is more to you than meets the eye, Harry Potter, he said softly. Much more. But that is a story for another time. Harry nodded, grateful for the reprieve. He knew the questions wouldn't stop. He knew the truth would eventually come out. But for now, he needed time. Time to understand his power, time to prepare for the battles ahead. Because the war with Voldemort was far from over. And Harry would need every ounce of his strength to win it. The summer after second year was a time of reflection and growth. Harry returned to Privet Drive, but he was no longer the frightened boy who had cowered in a cupboard. He was something more, a demon lord, a wizard, a being of immense power. The Dursleys could sense the change in him, and they kept their distance, their fear palpable in every interaction. Harry didn't mind. He had more important things to think about. He spent his days in the woods, exploring the limits of his power. The seal was gone, and he could feel the full extent of his abilities. He could create life from nothing, shape reality to his will, command the forces of nature. It was intoxicating, and it was terrifying. But he also felt the weight of responsibility. He was no longer just a boy. He was a demon lord, a being of immense power who had a duty to protect the world. The wizarding world was in danger, threatened by Voldemort and the forces of darkness. And Harry was the only one who could stop them. He would be ready. He had to be. The book from A Friend had changed everything. Harry sat in his cupboard, the Tempest grimoire open on his lap, and studied the final pages. The book spoke of the future, of a time when the old magic would return and the world would be transformed. It spoke of a demon lord who would rise to unite the realms of magic and monsters, to bridge the gap between the worlds. Harry knew that demon lord was him. He closed the book, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers. But Harry was ready. He had the power, the knowledge, and the will to face whatever came. He was Rimuru Tempest. He was Harry Potter. And he was going to change the world. Chapter 4, The Dark Lord's Despair. The summer before third year was a season of shadows. Harry sat in his cupboard, the grimoire open on his lap, and listened to the rain drum against the window. The sound was hypnotic, a steady rhythm that matched the pulse of his heart. He'd been reading for hours, absorbing the ancient knowledge that filled the pages, and his mind was sharp with understanding. The old magic was more than just power. It was a philosophy, a way of being. It demanded balance, wisdom, and control. It required the wielder to understand the consequences of their actions, to weigh every choice with care. Harry understood this now. He'd felt the weight of his power, the burden of his choices. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger and sacrifice. But he was ready. He had to be. Because Voldemort was coming. The dreams had grown worse. Every night, Harry would close his eyes and find himself standing in a dark chamber, facing the serpentine figure of the Dark Lord. Voldemort would smile, cruel and knowing, and speak in a voice that made Harry's blood run cold. "You have grown stronger, Harry Potter. I can feel it. The power that slumbers within you, it is magnificent. And it will be mine." Harry would shake his head, his jaw set in defiance. "You can't have it. It's not yours to take." Voldemort would laugh, a terrible sound that echoed in the darkness. "Foolish boy. You think your power is your own. It belongs to me. Everything you are, everything you have, is because of me. I made you, Harry Potter. And I will unmake you." The dreams always ended the same way, with Harry waking in a cold sweat, his scar burning, his heart pounding in his chest. He would lie in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, and feel the weight of Voldemort's presence pressing against his mind. But Harry was learning to fight back. He discovered that the connection between them was a two-way street. He could sense Voldemort's emotions, his plans, his fears. The Dark Lord was afraid, not of Harry, not yet, but of something else. Something ancient and powerful that he couldn't understand. Harry smiled in the darkness. He knew what that something was. It was the power of Tempest. The escape from Privet Drive was dramatic, even by Harry's standards. He'd been sitting in his cupboard, reading about the old magic, when the Dursleys had burst in with their usual bluster. They were angry about something, Harry couldn't remember what, and they'd started shouting, their faces red with fury. Harry had had enough. He'd stood up, his power flaring around him like a cloak of shadows, and the Dursleys had frozen. Their faces had gone pale, their eyes wide with terror. They backed away, stumbling over each other, and Harry had walked past them without a word. He'd left Privet Drive that night, his trunk floating behind him, and he'd never looked back. The journey to the Leaky Cauldron was uneventful, but Harry felt a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in years. He was no longer a prisoner. He was no longer a victim. He was a demon lord, and he would never be caged again. The leaky cauldron was bustling with activity when Harry arrived. The pub was filled with witches and wizards, their voices loud and cheerful. Harry found a table in the corner and ordered a meal, watching the crowd with a quiet intensity. He was used to being stared at, his scar made sure of that, but there was something different about the way people looked at him now. They were afraid. Harry could sense it, the undercurrent of fear that ran through the room. It wasn't fear of him, exactly. It was fear of what he represented. The boy who lived, the one who had defeated the Dark Lord. He was a symbol of hope, but he was also a reminder of the darkness that still lurked in the shadows. Harry ate his meal in silence, his thoughts churning. He'd been reading the grimoire, learning about the old magic, but he'd also been thinking about the wizarding world and its problems. The Ministry was corrupt, the Death Eaters were regrouping, and Voldemort was growing stronger. Something had to change. And Harry was going to be the one to make it happen. The Dementors attacked on the train. Harry had been sitting in a compartment with Ron and Hermione, talking about the upcoming term, when the temperature had dropped. The windows had frosted over, the lights had flickered, and a sense of dread had settled over them like a blanket of ice. Harry had felt it first, the cold, the despair, the overwhelming emptiness. It was like being back in the cupboard, back in the darkness, back in the pit of his own misery. He'd gasped, his hand flying to his chest, and he'd felt the power within him surge in response. The Dementor was a creature of shadow and darkness, a hooded figure that floated through the compartment door. It was reaching for him, its skeletal hand outstretched, and Harry had felt himself losing consciousness. But then he'd reached deep inside himself, to the power of Rimuru Tempest, and he'd pushed. The Dementor had screamed. It was a sound of pure agony, a wail that echoed in Harry's mind. The creature had recoiled, its form dissolving into shadow, and Harry had felt a surge of satisfaction. He'd defeated it. He'd driven it away. But the victory had come at a cost. Ron and Hermione were staring at him with a mixture of shock and confusion, and Harry knew he'd revealed too much. "Harry, what was that?" Hermione had asked, her voice trembling. "How did you do that?" Harry had shaken his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I don't know. I wanted it to go away, and it did. It was a lie, and they all knew it. But they didn't push. They could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the strain in his face. They let it go. For now. Professor Lupin was a revelation. The new defense against the dark arts teacher was a tired-looking man with graying hair and kind eyes. He moved with the weary grace of someone who had seen too much, and when he spoke, his voice was soft and gentle. Harry liked him immediately. Lupin's first lesson was about Dementors. He explained that the creatures fed on happy memories, leaving their victims with nothing but despair. He demonstrated the Patronus charm, a spell that could repel the creatures, and Harry watched with a mixture of fascination and awe. But there was something else about Lupin that intrigued Harry, a sense of familiarity, of recognition. He'd seen the man before, in the back of his mind, in the fragments of memory that belonged to Rimuru Tempest. He's like me, Harry thought. He's been touched by the darkness. He didn't know how he knew, but he was certain of it. Lupin had secrets, hidden wounds that ran deep. And Harry understood that better than anyone. The revelation of Sirius Black's innocence was a turning point. Harry had spent months believing that Black was a murderer, a Death Eater who had betrayed his parents to Voldemort. But the truth was far more complicated, and far more painful. Black was innocent. He had been framed by Peter Pettigrew, the real traitor, and he'd spent 12 years in Azkaban for a crime he didn't commit. Harry had felt a surge of rage when he'd learned the truth. Not at Black, at the world that had condemned him so unjustly. The Ministry, the system, the people who had believed the lies. It was wrong. So wrong. And Harry was determined to make it right. The confrontation in the Shrieking Shack was intense. Harry stood in the dusty room, his wand in his hand, and faced Sirius Black. The man was gaunt and haunted, his eyes burning with a desperate hope. "Harry," Black said, his voice hoarse. "I'm your godfather. I knew your parents. I loved them. I would never. "I know," Harry said, and the words came out before he could stop them. "I know you're innocent. I've seen the truth." Black's eyes widened. "How? How do you know?" Harry shook his head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that we have to stop Pettigrew. He's the one who betrayed them. He's the one who deserves to pay." The battle that followed was brutal. Pettigrew, revealed as the coward he truly was, tried to escape, but Harry was ready. He used his power, his demon lord abilities, to trap the traitor, to force him to face his crimes. And then the Dementors came. Harry felt them before he saw them, the cold, the despair, the overwhelming emptiness. They were swarming the castle, drawn by the promise of fear and pain. And they were heading straight for them. Harry didn't hesitate. He reached deep inside himself, to the power of Rimuru Tempest, and he let it flow. The Patronus that erupted from his wand was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was a stag, magnificent and powerful, its antlers gleaming with silver light. But it was also something more, something ancient, something primal. The stag charged at the Dementors, scattering them like leaves in the wind. And then, to Harry's shock, the stag transformed. It became a dragon, its scales shimmering with an inner fire. The dragon roared, and the sound echoed through the castle, shaking the very foundations. The Dementors fled. Harry stood in the center of the room, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd done it. He'd defeated them. But he knew that the battle was far from over. The truth about Remus Lupin was another blow. Harry had grown close to the professor over the course of the year, seeing in him a kindred spirit. But when the news of Lupin's lycanthropy was revealed, Harry felt a stab of betrayal. Lupin was a werewolf. A creature of the moon, a monster. But as Harry thought about it, he realized that the label meant nothing. Lupin was still the same man he'd come to know, kind, gentle, and brave. The fact that he turned into a wolf once a month didn't change that. Harry understood now, more than ever, that the wizarding world was governed by fear and prejudice. They feared what they didn't understand, and they hated what they feared. It was wrong. And Harry was going to change it. The summer between third and fourth year was a time of preparation. Harry returned to the Leaky Cauldron, but he didn't stay long. He traveled instead, using his power to move through the world in ways that no wizard could. He visited the ruins of ancient magical sites, the hidden places where the old magic still lingered. He studied with the creatures of the forest, learning their languages, their customs, their ways. And he grew stronger. The seal was gone, and his power was fully accessible. He could feel it pulsing beneath his skin, a warm and living thing that responded to his every thought. He was no longer just a wizard. He was no longer just a demon lord. He was something new, something that had never existed before. The world would never be the same. The Triwizard Tournament was a disaster. Harry had been forced to participate, his name drawn from the Goblet of Fire by forces he didn't understand. He'd faced dragons, mere-people, and a maze filled with deadly creatures. He'd almost died, more than once. But he'd survived. And he'd emerged stronger. The final task was the worst of all. Harry had been transported to a graveyard, where he'd witnessed the resurrection of Lord Voldemort. The Dark Lord had returned, more powerful than ever, and he demanded that Harry face him in a duel. Harry had faced him. And he'd survived. But the battle had left its mark. Harry had seen the death of Cedric Diggory, a good and honorable boy who didn't deserve to die. He'd felt the weight of that loss, the crushing guilt of survival. And he'd realized something. Voldemort was not the only enemy. The wizarding world was full of darkness, corruption, prejudice, fear. And Harry was going to fight it all. The vision came in the middle of the night. Harry had been sleeping in his dormitory, his dreams haunted by the memory of the graveyard. But this dream was different. It was vivid, real, and terrifying. He was standing in the Department of Mysteries, surrounded by Death Eaters. Voldemort was there, his red eyes gleaming with triumph. "Kill him," Voldemort said, and the words echoed in Harry's mind like a death knell. "Kill him now." Harry woke gasping, his scar burning, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what the vision meant. Voldemort was planning something. Something terrible. He had to act. He had to save the world. The battle in the Department of Mysteries was the most intense experience of Harry's life. He'd gathered his friends, Ron, Hermione, Neville, Ginny, and Luna, and led them into the Ministry, determined to stop Voldemort's plan. They'd fought Death Eaters, dodged curses, and nearly died more times than he could count. But Harry had been ready. He'd used his power, his Demon Lord abilities, to protect his friends, to defeat his enemies. He'd faced Voldemort's followers with a fury that was both ancient and primal. And then Voldemort himself had appeared. Harry had faced the Dark Lord, his wand raised, his power surging. The battle that followed was epic, a clash of magic and will that shook the very foundations of the Ministry. "Your power is nothing," Voldemort had snarled. "You are nothing. I am the greatest wizard of all time. I will crush you like a bug." Harry had smiled, and there was nothing innocent in that smile. "You don't understand, Voldemort. I'm not just a wizard. I'm something else. Something you've never faced." And then he'd shown Voldemort the truth. The power of Rimuru Tempest was unleashed. Harry had called upon every ounce of his strength, every scrap of his Demon Lord abilities. He'd created shields of pure energy, blades of shadow and light. He'd manipulated reality, bending the world to his will. Voldemort had watched, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you?" the Dark Lord had whispered, his voice trembling with fear. "What have you become?" Harry had laughed, a sound of pure triumph. "I am Harry Potter. And I am Rimuru Tempest. I am the Demon Lord of Tempest, the King of Monsters, the boy who lived. And I am going to destroy you." The battle had raged on, magic and power colliding in a storm of light and shadow. Harry had pushed Voldemort to the brink, his power overwhelming the Dark Lord's defenses. But in the end, Voldemort had escaped. He'd fled the Ministry, his followers retreating with him, and Harry had been left standing in the ruins. He'd won the battle. But the war was far from over. The prophecy was a burden Harry hadn't expected. He'd learned that he and Voldemort were bound by destiny, that one of them had to kill the other. It was a weight that had settled on his shoulders like a stone, a reminder that his life would never be his own. But Harry had accepted it. He'd embraced it. He would face Voldemort, and he would win. Because he was no longer just a boy. He was a Demon Lord, a being of immense power. And he would not be defeated. The summer between 5th and 6th year was a time of transformation. Harry had returned to the Leaky Cauldron, but he didn't stay long. He traveled the world, seeking out the hidden places where the old magic still thrived. He studied with the creatures of the earth, the spirits of the sky, the beings of the sea. And he grew stronger. He could feel his power expanding, his abilities growing. The old magic was becoming a part of him, an extension of his will. He was learning to create and destroy, to transform and evolve. He was becoming something new. Something the world had never seen. The cave was dark and cold, filled with the stench of death. Harry had come here with Dumbledore, seeking the Horcrux that Voldemort had hidden. They'd fought their way through traps and spells, and now they stood before the basin of potion that held the locket. "Let me do it," Harry had said, his voice firm. "Let me drink the potion." Dumbledore had refused, his eyes filled with a sadness that made Harry's heart ache. "No, Harry. This is my burden to bear." But Harry had insisted. He'd used his power, his Demon Lord abilities, to take the potion himself. He'd felt the poison burning through his veins, the visions of despair and sorrow overwhelming his mind. But he'd endured it. He'd come through the other side, battered but alive. And he'd found the Horcrux. The death of Dumbledore was a wound that would never fully heal. Harry had watched the old wizard fall, struck down by Snape's curse. He'd felt the loss like a physical blow, a grief that was almost too much to bear. But he'd also felt something else, determination. He would carry on. He would continue. The fight. He would avenge Dumbledore's death and destroy Voldemort. He owed it to the old man who had believed in him. The search for the Horcruxes was a journey of discovery. Harry, Ron, and Hermione traveled across the country, seeking the fragments of Voldemort's soul. They faced danger at every turn, but Harry was ready. He used his power, his demon lord abilities, to protect them, to guide them. They found the locket. They found the cup. They found the diadem. Each Horcrux was destroyed, each fragment of Voldemort's soul shattered. But Harry knew that the final battle was coming. The confrontation with Voldemort was inevitable. The Battle of Hogwarts was the culmination of everything. Harry stood in the Great Hall, his wand raised, his power surging. Voldemort was before him, surrounded by his followers, his red eyes gleaming with hatred. "Harry Potter," Voldemort hissed. "The boy who lived. Come to die." Harry smiled, and there was something ancient in that smile. "No, Voldemort. I've come to end this." The battle that followed was epic, a clash of magic and power that shook the very foundations of the castle. Harry wielded his demon lord abilities with a skill that left even Voldemort breathless. But the Dark Lord was powerful, driven by a hatred that burned like a star. He fought with everything he had, his curses and spells crashing against Harry's defenses. And then Harry made a choice. He reached deep inside himself, to the very core of his being. He called upon the power of creation, destruction, and transformation. He called upon the old magic, the power of the earth and sky and sea. And he changed. The transformation was beautiful and terrible. Harry's form shifted, his human shape dissolving into something new. He became a being of light and shadow, of fire and ice. He became the demon lord of Tempest, the king of monsters, the embodiment of the old magic. Voldemort stared at him, his eyes wide with shock. What? Are you?" the Dark Lord whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Harry's voice echoed in the silence, ancient and powerful. "I am what you feared. I am the power that transcends mortality. I am the end of your reign, Voldemort. I am your doom." And then he struck. The power that erupted from him was beyond measure. It swept through the Great Hall, through the castle, through the very fabric of reality. Voldemort screamed, his body dissolving into shadow, his soul fragmenting into nothing. But Harry didn't stop. He reached out and grabbed the fragment of Voldemort's soul that still clung to his scar. He pulled it free, feeling the dark magic burn against his skin. And then he destroyed it, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The Dark Lord was dead. Finally, permanently dead. Harry stood in the Great Hall, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body trembling with exhaustion. He'd done it. He'd defeated Voldemort. He'd saved the wizarding world. But the victory felt hollow. Because he knew that the world was still broken. The corruption, the prejudice, the fear, it was all still there. And it would take more than power to fix it. It would take change. The aftermath of the battle was a time of reckoning. Harry stood in the ruins of Hogwarts, looking out at the gathered crowd. The wizarding world had come together to celebrate their victory, but Harry knew that the celebration was only the beginning. "People of the wizarding world," he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I have defeated Voldemort. But the battle is not over. The corruption, the prejudice, the fear that allowed him to rise, it is still here. It will always be here, unless we change." The crowd murmured, uncertain. But Harry continued. "I am not just Harry Potter. I am Rimuru Tempest, the demon lord of Tempest. I have power beyond your understanding. And I will use that power to create a better world, a world where monsters and wizards and magical creatures coexist in peace. A world where everyone is valued, no matter who they are." He paused, looking out at the faces of the crowd. They were afraid, but they were also hopeful. "Will you join me?" he asked. "Will you help me build a new world?" The silence stretched on, and Harry felt a flicker of doubt. But then someone stepped forward, Neville Longbottom, his face resolute. "I'll join you, Harry," Neville said. "I'll help you build a better world. Others followed. Ron, Hermione, Luna, Ginny. The Weasleys, the Longbottoms, the Lovegoods. And then the crowd began to cheer, their voices rising in a chorus of hope. Harry smiled, and there was something ancient in that smile. Something that had seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of worlds. The new world was beginning. And Harry would be there to lead it. Chapter 5, The War of Two Lords. The silence after victory was heavier than any battle. Harry stood in the great hall of Hogwarts, the rubble of the final confrontation still scattered around him like broken dreams. The bodies had been removed, the wounded tended to, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. He could feel it pressing against his skin, settling into his bones, the knowledge that the world had changed, and that he was the one who had changed it. But Voldemort's defeat was not the end. It was merely the opening move in a much larger game. Harry could sense it in the whispers that ran through the magical world like poison through a vein. The Death Eaters had scattered, but they had not been destroyed. They were regrouping, consolidating their power, waiting for the moment to strike back. And they were not alone. There were others, dark wizards, creatures of shadow, beings who had served Voldemort out of fear or ambition or simple malice. They would not simply accept defeat. They would fight. And Harry would have to fight them. The first attack came 3 days after the battle. Harry was in the Ministry of Magic, meeting with the new Minister for Magic, Kingsley Shacklebolt. They were discussing the reconstruction of the wizarding world, the reforms that needed to be made, the changes that had to be implemented. Harry had been pushing for the integration of magical creatures, for the recognition of beings who had been marginalized for centuries. Kingsley was supportive, but cautious. The Ministry was still reeling from the war, and change came slowly. And then the windows exploded. Harry felt the magic before he saw it, a wave of dark energy that crashed against the Ministry's defenses like a tidal wave. He was on his feet in an instant, his power surging, his senses reaching out to identify the threat. Death Eaters. A dozen of them, maybe more. They had breached the Ministry's wards, and they were attacking with a ferocity that spoke of desperation. Get to safety. Harry shouted to Kingsley, and then he was moving, his body blurring with speed that no wizard could match. The battle was swift and brutal. Harry fought with the power of Rimuru Tempest, his demon lord abilities unleashed in a storm of light and shadow. He created shields of pure energy, deflecting the Death Eaters' curses. He summoned blades of fire, cutting through their defenses. He called upon the old magic, bending reality to his will. The Death Eaters didn't stand a chance. Within minutes, they were defeated, captured, bound, and waiting for the Aurors to take them away. Harry stood in the center of the destruction, his breath coming in steady, measured gasps. He was unharmed. He was always unharmed now. But the attack had sent a message. The Death Eaters were not finished. They would keep fighting, keep attacking, keep trying to reclaim the power they had lost. And Harry would have to stop them. Every time. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Harry traveled across the country, hunting down the remnants of Voldemort's forces. He worked with the Aurors, with the Order of the Phoenix, with anyone who was willing to fight. He used his power to track the Death Eaters, to find their hiding places, to bring them to justice. But it wasn't enough. The Death Eaters were like roaches, scattering into the shadows whenever he approached. They attacked villages, killed innocents, and vanished before the Aurors could arrive. They were ruthless, cunning, and they had nothing to lose. Harry knew he had to change his strategy. He couldn't just react to their attacks, he had to anticipate them, to outmaneuver them. He had to think like a commander, not just a warrior. He had to become the Demon Lord of Tempest once more. The war room was in the basement of Grimmauld Place. Harry had transformed the old Black family home into a command center, a place where he could plan his campaign against the Death Eaters. Maps covered the walls, marked with pins and notes and symbols that only he could understand. His allies gathered around a long oak table, their faces grim with determination. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Harry said, his voice calm and measured. "They're using fear to control the population. They attack, we respond, and the people lose faith in our ability to protect them. We have to break that cycle. How? Ron asked, his brow furrowed with concern. They're like ghosts, they appear, they attack, and they vanish. We can't fight what we can't find. Harry smiled, and there was something cold in that smile. We can. We just have to make them come to us. He explained his plan. It was risky, dangerous, and it required a level of trust that made his allies nervous. But it was also brilliant, a strategy that used the Death Eater's own tactics against them. We'll create a target, Harry said. Something they can't resist. A gathering of powerful wizards, a celebration of our victory. They'll be drawn to it like moths to a flame. And when they come? Hermione asked, her voice sharp with worry. We'll be outnumbered. They could kill us all. Harry's smile widened. They won't kill us. Because I'll be there. The gathering was held at Hogwarts. Harry had chosen the castle deliberately. It was a symbol of hope, a place where the magical world had come together to fight the darkness. The Death Eaters would be unable to resist the opportunity to strike at such a powerful symbol. The great hall was filled with witches and wizards, their voices raised in celebration. The enchanted ceiling reflected the night sky, a field of stars that seemed to twinkle with approval. Candles floated overhead, casting a warm glow over the assembled crowd. Harry stood at the head of the hall, his eyes scanning the faces of his allies. Ron was there, his hand on his wand. Hermione was beside him, her expression tense but determined. Neville, Luna, Ginny, all of them had come to fight. And in the shadows, hidden from view, were the warriors of Tempest. Harry had summoned them from the other world, the monsters and spirits who had once called him Lord. They had come to fight, to protect, to serve. The trap was set. The Death Eaters arrived at midnight. Harry felt them before he saw them, a surge of dark energy that crashed against the castle's wards like a wave against a cliff. He smiled, and his power rose to meet the challenge. The doors of the great hall exploded inward, and the Death Eaters poured through. They were masked and robed, their wands raised, their voices raised in battle cries. At their head was a figure Harry recognized, Lucius Malfoy, his face twisted with hatred. Harry Potter. Lucius shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. You thought you could hide from us? You thought you could defeat the Dark Lord and we would simply surrender? You are a fool, Potter. A fool and a child. Harry stepped forward, his power surging around him like a cloak of fire. I'm not hiding, Lucius. I'm waiting. The battle began. Harry fought with a ferocity that left the Death Eaters reeling. He was everywhere. At once, his power flowing through him like a river. He created shields of pure energy, deflecting curses. He summoned blades of shadow, cutting through the enemy's ranks. He called upon the old magic, bending reality to his will. But the Death Eaters were prepared. They had brought reinforcements, dark creatures, giants, and dementors. They swarmed the hall, their numbers overwhelming. Harry felt a flicker of doubt. Had he underestimated them? Had he led his allies into a trap? And then the warriors of Tempest emerged from the shadows. They were magnificent, dragons and goblins, elves and spirits, creatures of fire and ice and shadow. They fought with a fury that matched Harry's own, their power a symphony of destruction. The battle turned in an instant. The Death Eaters were routed, their forces scattered. Lucius Malfoy tried to flee, but Harry caught him, his hand closing around the man's throat. Tell me where the others are, Harry said, his voice cold. Tell me where they're hiding, and I might let you live. Lucius laughed, a desperate, broken sound. You think this is over, Potter? You think you've won? The Dark Lord's followers are everywhere. They are in the Ministry, in the Auror office, in the very heart of the wizarding world. You will never defeat us. Never. Harry's grip tightened. We'll see. He released Lucius, and the man crumpled to the ground. Harry turned away, his mind already racing. The Death Eaters were more organized than he'd thought. They had infiltrated the very institutions that were supposed to protect the wizarding world. The war was far from over. It was only beginning. The weeks that followed were a time of strategy and sacrifice. Harry worked tirelessly, coordinating with his allies, hunting down the Death Eaters who had gone into hiding. He used his power to track them, to find their secrets, to bring them to justice. He was relentless, unstoppable, a force of nature that would not be denied. But the cost was high. Friends died. Allies fell. The war took its toll on everyone, including Harry. He could feel the weight of the losses, the burden of the choices he'd made. He wondered if he was becoming the very thing he'd sworn to destroy, a monster in the name of victory. But he pushed the doubts aside. There was no time for self-pity. There was only the war. The confrontation with the Death Eater leadership came on a cold winter night. Harry had tracked them to a hidden fortress in the mountains, a place that had been enchanted to be invisible to all but the most powerful wizards. He had gathered his allies, his warriors of Tempest, and he was ready to end this. The fortress was vast, its walls made of dark stone, its towers reaching toward the sky. Harry walked through its gates, his power surging around him like a storm. The Death Eaters were waiting for him, their wands raised, their faces twisted with hate. "Harry Potter," a voice said, and Harry turned to face the speaker. It was Bellatrix Lestrange, her eyes wild with madness. "You have come to die." Harry smiled, and there was nothing kind in that smile. "I've come to end this, Bellatrix. You and your kind. The war is over." Bellatrix laughed, a sound of pure insanity. "You think you can defeat us? You think you can defeat the Dark Lord's legacy? We are eternal, Potter. We will never die." Harry shook his head. "You're wrong. Everything dies. Even darkness." He raised his hand, and his power surged. The fortress shook, the walls cracking under the strain. The Death Eaters screamed, their curses bouncing off Harry's shields like water off stone. His allies fought beside him, the warriors of Tempest destroying the enemy's defenses. The battle was brutal, but it was swift. Harry cut through the Death Eater ranks, his power unstoppable. He reached Bellatrix, his hand closing around her throat, and he felt the dark magic that had corrupted her soul. "Your time is over," Harry said, and his voice was cold. "The age of darkness is done." He released her, and she fell to the ground, her body broken and defeated. The other Death Eaters followed, captured or killed, their reign of terror finally at an end. Harry stood in the center of the fortress, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had won. The war was over. But the cost had been immense. The aftermath was a time of healing. Harry worked with the new ministry to rebuild the wizarding world, to create a society that was fair and just. He used his power to protect the innocent, to punish the guilty, to ensure that the darkness would never rise again. But he also knew that the world needed more than just protection. It needed change. It needed to learn from its mistakes, to grow beyond the hatred and fear that had allowed Voldemort to rise. Harry gathered his allies, the warriors of Tempest, the wizards and witches who had fought beside him. He spoke to them of a new world, a world where monsters and wizards and magical creatures could coexist in peace. He spoke of integration and understanding, of hope and unity. "We have a choice," Harry said, his voice ringing in the silence. "We can remain divided, fearful of each other, or we can come together. We can build something new, something better. A world where everyone is valued, no matter who they are." The crowd was silent, their faces a mixture of hope and doubt. But then someone stepped forward, Neville Longbottom, his face resolute. "I'll join you, Harry," Neville said. "I'll help you build a better world." Others followed, Ron, Hermione, Luna, Ginny. The Weasleys, the Longbottoms, the Lovegoods. And then the crowd began to cheer, their voices rising in a chorus of hope. Harry smiled, and there was something ancient in that smile. Something that had seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of worlds. The new world was beginning. And Harry would be there to lead it. The celebration was a triumph. The wizarding world had come together to honor their victory, to remember those who had fallen, to look forward to a brighter future. Harry stood at the center of the celebration, his friends at his side, his people around him. And he felt at peace. The war was over. The battle had been won. But Harry knew that the real work was just beginning. The world was broken, and it needed to be rebuilt. It needed to be transformed, from a place of fear and hatred into a place of hope and unity. Harry was ready for that challenge. He had the power, the knowledge, and the will to make it happen. He was Rimuru Tempest, the demon lord of Tempest, and he would not fail. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes finding his friends, his allies, his people. He smiled, and the power within him hummed with satisfaction. The new world was coming. And Harry would be its king. The days that followed were a time of transformation. Harry worked tirelessly, using his power to heal the wounds of the wizarding world. He created new institutions, new laws, new ways of thinking. He brought the magical creatures into the fold, giving them a voice, a place in society. He bridged the gap between the magical and mundane worlds, creating a future where everyone could live in peace. It was a monumental task, but Harry was undaunted. He had faced worse. He had faced Voldemort and won. He had faced the Death Eaters and triumphed. He could face this. And he did. The years passed, and the world changed. The old hatreds faded, replaced by understanding. The old divisions crumbled, replaced by unity. The wizarding world became a place of hope and possibility. And Harry, Rimuru, stood at its heart, a symbol of everything that had been achieved. But he never forgot the lessons of the war. He never forgot the cost, the sacrifices, the pain. He carried it with him always, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. He was the demon lord of Tempest. He was the boy who lived. He was the king of two worlds. And he would never stop fighting. For the future he believed in. The final confrontation with the Death Eaters was a turning point. Harry had led his forces to the remnants of the enemy's stronghold, a fortress hidden deep in the mountains. The battle that followed was fierce, but Harry was unstoppable. He used his power to break through the enemy's defenses, to shatter their resistance, to bring them to their knees. The Death Eaters surrendered. Harry stood in the center of their stronghold, his power surging around him like a storm. He looked at the defeated enemy, his eyes cold. "This is over," he said, his voice echoing in the silence. "The war is finished. There will be no more fighting, no more hatred, no more fear. The age of darkness is done." The Death Eaters bowed their heads, and Harry knew that it was true. The war was over. The future was bright. And he would be there to guide it. The peace that followed was a time of rebuilding. Harry worked with the ministry, with his allies, with anyone who was willing to help. He used his power to heal the land, to restore what had been destroyed. He created new institutions, new laws, new ways of thinking. He built a world where everyone could thrive. It was a monumental task, but Harry was undaunted. He had faced worse. He had faced Voldemort and won. He had faced the Death Eaters and triumphed. He could face this. And he did. The years passed, and the world changed. The old hatreds faded, replaced by understanding. The old divisions crumbled, replaced by unity. The wizarding world became a place of hope and possibility. And Harry, Rimuru, stood at its heart, a symbol of everything that had been achieved. The day of the celebration was bright and beautiful. Harry stood on the balcony of Hogwarts, looking out at the gathered crowd. Thousands of witches and wizards had come to honor the victory, to remember the fallen, to celebrate the future. Harry raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. "People of the wizarding world," he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "We have come through the darkness. We have faced the enemy and won. But the battle is not over. The fight for a better world is never over. It is a fight that requires all of us, every day, to choose hope over fear, unity over division, love over hate." He paused, looking out at the faces of his allies, his friends, his people. "I am proud of what we have achieved," he continued. "But I am more proud of what we will achieve. Together, we will build a world where everyone is valued, no matter who they are. A world where magic and monsters coexist in peace. A world where the darkness never rises again. He smiled, and the power within him hummed with satisfaction. Will you join me? The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising in a chorus of hope. Harry stood on the balcony, his heart full of joy, and he knew that the future was bright. The new world was beginning. And Harry would be there to lead it. The years that followed were a time of transformation. Harry led the wizarding world into a new era, an era of peace and prosperity. He used his power to heal the wounds of the war, to bridge the divisions that had plagued the magical community for centuries. He created a world where monsters and wizards could coexist, where magical creatures were valued and respected, where everyone had a place. It was a monumental task, but Harry was undaunted. He had faced worse. He had faced Voldemort and won. He had faced the Death Eaters and triumphed. He could face this. And he did. The world changed, and Harry changed with it. He became a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in the darkness. He was the demon lord of Tempest, the king of two worlds, and he would never stop fighting for the future he believed in. The war was over. The peace had begun. And the world was better for it. Chapter 6, The King of Two Worlds. The morning light filtered through the ancient windows of Hogwarts Castle, painting the stones in shades of gold and amber. Harry stood at the highest tower, his hands resting on the weathered parapet, and watched the sun rise over the forbidden forest. The world below him was peaceful, serene, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once consumed it. 10 years had passed since the fall of Voldemort. 10 years since the final battle, since the death of the Dark Lord, since the beginning of a new era. Harry had watched the wizarding world transform, had guided it through the darkest days, had shaped it into something new. But the work was never truly finished. There was always more to do, more to build, more to heal. And Harry was ready for it. The great hall was filled with dignitaries from across the magical world. Witches and wizards from every corner of the globe had gathered to witness the historic occasion, the formal establishment of the United Magical Nations, a governing body that would bring together magical communities from around the world. It was Harry's vision, his dream, and it was finally becoming a reality. He stood at the head of the hall, his robes of deepest blue shimmering with threads of silver and gold. Around him stood his allies, Ron and Hermione, now respected leaders in their own right, Neville, who had become the greatest herbologist of his generation, Luna, whose wisdom and insight had shaped the New World's policies, Ginny, who had become a renowned Quidditch player and advocate for magical creature rights. And behind them, in the shadows, stood the warriors of Tempest, dragons and goblins, elves and spirits, the beings who had followed him from another world. They had come to witness this moment, to celebrate the union of two worlds. Today, Harry said, his voice carrying across the silent hall, we make history. Today, we declare that the age of division is over. Today, we create a world where every being, wizard, monster, or magical creature, has a place. A world where we work together, build together, grow together. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the assembled crowd. He saw hope in their faces, and fear, and uncertainty. But he also saw something else, a willingness to try, a desire to believe. I know this is not easy, he continued. I know the old hatreds run deep, the old wounds are slow to heal. But I also know that we are capable of more. We are capable of change, of growth, of becoming something greater than we were before. He raised his hand, and the power within him surged. The old magic flowed through him, warm and familiar, and he channeled it into the words he spoke. Let this be the beginning of a new age. An age of unity, of peace, of hope. Let us build a world that our children, and their children, will be proud to inherit. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising in a chorus of approval. Harry smiled, and the power within him hummed with satisfaction. He had done it. He had brought the world together. But the work was far from over. The negotiations were the hardest part. Harry had known that bringing the magical communities together would be difficult. The old prejudices ran deep, the old divisions were hard to overcome. But he had been determined to succeed, and he had refused to give up. Day after day, he sat in the conference rooms of the new United Magical Nations, mediating disputes, finding compromises, building bridges. He used his power to show the delegates what was possible, to help them see beyond their fears and suspicions. It was exhausting work, but Harry never complained. He had chosen this path, and he would see it through. The turning point came when the goblins agreed to join the new government. It was a historic moment, a symbol of the changes that were sweeping the magical world. The goblins had been marginalized for centuries, treated as lesser beings by the wizarding community. But under Harry's leadership, they had been given a voice, a seat at the table. The other magical creatures followed, the elves, the centaurs, the mere people. One by one, they joined the new government, their voices adding to the chorus of change. Harry watched it all with a sense of wonder. He had dreamed of this moment, but he had never truly believed it would come. And yet, here it was. The world was changing, and he was at its heart. The first crisis came 6 months after the founding of the United Magical Nations. A rogue group of dark wizards had emerged from the shadows, calling themselves the Purists. They believed that the new government was a threat to wizarding supremacy, that the integration of magical creatures was a betrayal of their heritage. They had begun attacking magical creature settlements, spreading fear and hatred. Harry knew he had to act. The Purists were a direct challenge to everything he had built, everything he believed in. They had to be stopped. He gathered his allies, his warriors of Tempest, and he set out to confront the Purists. The battle was swift and brutal. Harry used his power to track the dark wizards, to find their hiding places, to bring them to justice. But he also knew that violence was not the answer. He had to show the world that the new government was not just about force, but about justice. He had to prove that the Purists' fears were unfounded. He offered the Purists a choice: surrender and face a fair trial, or continue their fight and face the consequences. Most of them surrendered. The few who didn't were dealt with swiftly and decisively. Harry had shown the world that the new order was strong. But he had also shown that it was just. And that was the most important lesson of all. The creation of the Tempest Academy was the next step. Harry had dreamed of a school where magical creatures and wizards could learn together, where the old divisions could be healed through education and understanding. He had poured his heart into the project, working with architects and educators to create a place that would be a symbol of the new world. The Academy was built on the grounds of Hogwarts, a sprawling complex of buildings that blended wizarding architecture with the organic designs of the magical creatures. It was a place of wonder and learning, a place where young beings could grow and thrive. Harry stood at the gates of the Academy on its opening day, watching as students from every corner of the magical world streamed through. He saw goblins and elves, centaurs and mere people, wizards and witches, all walking together, all learning together. It was everything he had hoped for. He smiled, and the power within him hummed with satisfaction. He had built something lasting, something that would endure long after he was gone. The world was changing. And Harry was proud to be part of it. The years passed, and Harry's legend grew. He was known throughout the magical world as the King of Two Worlds, the demon lord who had bridged the gap between the realms. He was respected and feared, loved and admired. But he never let the fame go to his head. He remained humble, grounded, focused on the work that still needed to be done. He traveled the world, mediating disputes, building bridges, spreading the message of unity and hope. And he never forgot his friends. Ron and Hermione had become the pillars of the new government, their wisdom and dedication shaping the policies of the United Magical Nations. Neville had transformed the Hogwarts grounds into a living garden, a place of beauty and wonder. Luna had become the voice of the magical creatures, her gentle wisdom guiding the integration efforts. Ginny had become a symbol of hope for young witches and wizards, her success on the Quidditch pitch inspiring a new generation. And Harry was there for all of them, their friend, their ally, their king. The reunion was a celebration of everything they had achieved. Harry had gathered his friends in the Great Hall of Hogwarts, the place where it had all begun. The hall was filled with laughter and music. The enchanted ceiling reflecting a sky of brilliant stars. The tables were laden with food and drink, and the air was thick with joy. "I can't believe we're here," Ron said, his arm around Hermione. "I mean, really here. After everything we've been through." Hermione smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "We did it. We actually did it." Harry nodded, his heart full. "We did. But we couldn't have done it alone. We did it together." Neville raised his glass. To Harry. The boy who lived. The Demon Lord. The King of Two Worlds. To Harry, the crowd echoed, and Harry felt a warmth spread through him. He had found his place. He had found his purpose. He had found his home. The world was changing, and he was at its heart. The moment of reflection came late that night. Harry stood on the balcony of Hogwarts, looking out at the grounds below. The moon was full, casting a silver light over the forbidden forest. The world was peaceful, serene. But Harry's mind was elsewhere. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the cupboard under the stairs, the Dursleys, the first letter from Hogwarts. He thought about the battles he had fought, the friends he had made, the losses he had suffered. He thought about Voldemort, about the darkness that had threatened to consume the world. And he thought about Rimuru Tempest, the demon lord who had given his life to save his people. He thought about the city of Tempest, the monsters who had called him lord, the world he had left behind. He wondered if they were still there, still waiting for him. He wondered if he would ever find a way back. But he also knew that he had found something new. A new home, a new family, a new purpose. The wizarding world was his now, and he would protect it with everything he had. He was the king of two worlds. And he would never stop fighting for the future he believed in. The vision came in the dead of night. Harry was sleeping in his chambers at Hogwarts, his dreams filled with the faces of his friends. But then the dream shifted, and he was standing in a familiar place, the city of Tempest, its towers of crystal and gold rising into a sky filled with two moons. He walked through the streets, his heart pounding with joy. He saw the faces of his people, the monsters who had loved him, and he felt tears streaming down his face. "Welcome home, Lord Rimuru," a voice said, and Harry turned to face the speaker. It was Veldora, the dragon, his scales gleaming with an inner fire. "We have been waiting for you." Harry's breath caught in his throat. "Veldora. I thought I'd never see you again." Veldora smiled, and it was a warm, loving smile. "You are always with us, Lord Rimuru. You are our king, our friend, our family. And we will never abandon you." The dream faded, and Harry woke with a start. His heart was pounding, his face wet with tears. He had seen his people. He had felt their love. He had known, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that he would see them again. The worlds were not separate. They were connected, bound by the magic that flowed through all things. And one day, Harry would find a way to bridge the gap between them. But for now, he had work to do. The wizarding world needed him, and he would not let them down. The final ceremony was held in the Great Hall of Hogwarts. Harry stood at the head of the hall, surrounded by his friends, his allies, his family. The United Magical Nations had come together to honor him, to celebrate his achievements, to recognize his role in shaping the new world. "Today, we honor a legend," Kingsley Shacklebolt said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "Today, we honor a hero. A king. A friend. Harry Potter, Rimuru Tempest, has given us more than we could ever repay. He has given us hope." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Harry felt his eyes sting with tears. He had never expected this, never wanted this. But he was grateful for it. "I didn't do this alone," Harry said. His voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done it alone. I had friends, the best friends anyone could ask for. I had allies, brave, loyal, and true. I had a family that believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the crowd. He saw Ron and Hermione, their faces wet with tears. He saw Neville, his hand raised in a salute. He saw Luna, her eyes shining with joy. He saw Ginny, her smile bright and warm. "This is our victory," Harry said. All of us. Together. And together, we will continue to build a world that is worthy of the sacrifices we have made. The crowd rose to their feet, their voices raised in a chorus of approval. Harry smiled, and the power within him hummed with satisfaction. He had done it. He had brought the world together. And the future was bright. The epilogue came 10 years later. Harry stood on the grounds of Hogwarts, watching the sun rise over the forbidden forest. The world was peaceful, serene, a testament to everything he had built. But his mind was elsewhere. He thought about Rimuru Tempest, the demon lord who had given his life to save his people. He thought about the city of Tempest, the monsters who had called him lord. He thought about the world he had left behind, and the world he had found. He knew, now, that the two worlds were connected. The magic that flowed through all things was the same magic that bound the realms together. And one day, he would find a way to bridge the gap. But for now, he was content. He had found a home, a family, a purpose. He was the king of two worlds, and he would never stop fighting for the future he believed in. He turned away from the sunrise and walked back to the castle. His friends were waiting for him, their faces bright with smiles. "Harry, there you are." Ron called. "We were wondering where you'd gone." Harry smiled, and the power within him hummed with joy. "Just taking a walk. Enjoying the morning." Hermione raised an eyebrow. "You? Enjoying the morning? You're usually up before the sun, working on some new project." Harry laughed. "I'm taking a break. Even kings need a day off." Neville clapped him on the back. "Come on, then. Breakfast is waiting. And you know how the house elves get when we're late." Harry walked with his friends into the great hall, his heart full of love. The world was peaceful, the future was bright, and he was surrounded by the people he loved. He had found his place. He had found his home. And he would never let it go. The years passed, and Harry's legend grew. He was known throughout the magical world as the King of Two Worlds, the demon lord who had brought peace and unity to a divided land. He was loved and admired, respected and feared. But he never let the fame go to his head. He remained humble, grounded, focused on the work that still needed to be done. He traveled the world, mediating disputes, building bridges, spreading the message of unity and hope. And he never forgot his friends. Ron and Hermione had become the pillars of the new government, their wisdom and dedication shaping the policies of the United Magical Nations. Neville had transformed the Hogwarts grounds into a living garden, a place of beauty and wonder. Luna had become the voice of the magical creatures, her gentle wisdom guiding the integration efforts. Ginny had become a symbol of hope for young witches and wizards, her success on the Quidditch pitch inspiring a new generation. And Harry was there for all of them, their friend, their ally, their king. The final scene was set in the garden of Hogwarts. Harry sat on a bench beneath the old oak tree, looking out at the grounds. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the castle. The world was peaceful, serene. His friends were around him, Ron and Hermione, their hands intertwined, Neville, tending to the flowers, Luna, her eyes distant and dreamy, Ginny, her hand resting on Harry's shoulder. "Are you happy, Harry?" Ginny asked, her voice soft. Harry smiled, and the power within him hummed with contentment. "Yes. I am. I never thought I would be. But I am." Ron snorted. "You? Happy? That's a first." Harry laughed. "Shut up, Ron." Hermione smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "We've come a long way, haven't we? From the cupboard under the stairs. From the battles. From everything." Harry nodded, his heart full. "We have. And we couldn't have done it alone. We did it together." Luna looked up at the sky, her eyes distant. "The stars are beautiful tonight. They remind me of something. Something I read once. About a demon lord who built a kingdom of monsters. About a boy who became a king." Harry smiled. "That's a good story." "It is," Luna agreed. "And it's true. All of it. Harry looked at his friends, his family, his people. The world was peaceful, the future was bright, and he was surrounded by the people he loved. He had found his place. He had found his home. And he would never let it go. The end was not an ending. It was a beginning. Harry stood on the balcony of Hogwarts, looking out at the world he had helped to shape. The sun was rising over the forbidden forest, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. The world was peaceful, serene, a testament to everything he had achieved. But Harry knew that the work was never truly finished. There was always more to do, more to build, more to heal. And he was ready for it. He reached out with his power, feeling the magic that flowed through all things. He felt the connection to Rimuru Tempest, to the city of Tempest, to the world he had left behind. And he knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that he would find a way to bridge the gap between the worlds. But for now, he was content. He had found a home, a family, a purpose. He was the king of two worlds, and he would never stop fighting for the future he believed in. He turned away from the sunrise and walked back into the castle. His friends were waiting for him, their faces bright with smiles. "Harry! There you are!" Ron called. "We were wondering where you'd gone." Harry smiled, and the power within him hummed with joy. "Just taking a walk. Enjoying the morning." Hermione raised an eyebrow. "You? Enjoying the morning? That's a first." Harry laughed. "I'm taking a break. Even kings need a day off." Neville clapped him on the back. "Come on, then. Breakfast is waiting." Harry walked with his friends into the great hall, his heart full of love. The world was peaceful, the future was bright, and he was surrounded by the people he loved. He had found his place. He had found his home. And he would never let it go. The story of Harry Potter, the story of Rimuru Tempest, was not over. It was just beginning. A new era had dawned, an era of peace and unity, of hope and possibility. The wizarding world had been transformed, its old divisions healed, its old wounds closed. And at its heart stood Harry, the boy who lived, the demon lord, the king of two worlds. He had faced the darkness and won. He had faced the darkness and transformed it. He had built a world where everyone could thrive, where everyone could find their place. And he would never stop fighting for that world. He would never stop believing in it. He would never stop hoping. Because that was who he was. That was what he had become. Harry Potter. Rimuru Tempest. The King of Two Worlds. The end.